The air in the archive was cold, tinged with the faint metallic scent of old paper and ink. Shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, stacked with centuries of history, some of it fragile beyond repair, some of it carrying secrets that could shatter the foundations of what the world thought it knew. He moved cautiously between the aisles, flashlight cutting through shadows, ears straining for the slightest sound. The room was supposed to be secure, sealed under multiple layers of locks and surveillance. Yet, as he reached for the familiar cabinet that held the Templar Scrolls, a sinking realization took hold. The space was empty. The pages, centuries-old manuscripts that had survived fires, wars, and the relentless march of time were gone. His heart pounded, each beat echoing in the cavernous space as he tried to process the theft. How could this have happened? The archive's security system, supposedly foolproof, showed no signs of tampering on the main entrances. Yet the missing pages were proof enough. Someone had been here, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. He crouched to examine the floor, spotting faint scuff marks leading toward a side exit. The footprints were small, deliberate, almost calculated. Whoever had taken the pages had planned every detail, leaving nothing to chance, nothing for a casual observer to follow. He tapped into the security feed, eyes scanning every frame, every frozen second. At first, the footage seemed unremarkable, just the usual rhythm of archivists cataloging materials, the flicker of fluorescent lights overhead. Then, almost imperceptibly, movement. A shadow slipping between aisles, careful, precise, almost gliding over the marble floor. The figure wore dark clothing, hooded, face obscured, moving with the confidence of someone who had been here before. There was no panic in the way they carried themselves. There was purpose. They paused briefly, reaching for the cabinet with an almost reverent motion, then pulled the scrolls free and vanished as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. He replayed the footage over and over, each iteration revealing more of the thief's method, yet less of their identity. The archive had been breached in less than 3 minutes, executed with surgical precision. His fingers trembled as he pulled out a notebook, scribbling details in frantic loops, trying to connect the dots. The pages weren't just stolen, they had been targeted. Whoever had done this understood the historical, the symbolic, the forbidden weight of the Templar Scrolls. And they weren't just stealing history. They were taking power. He moved quickly, calling the security team, his voice low but urgent. They arrived within minutes, faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lighting, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They combed the archive, checking locks, electronic logs, and hidden entrances. Nothing. No forced entry, no alarms triggered, nothing to indicate a struggle. It was as if the thief had stepped out of time itself, lifting the pages from the past and disappearing into the present. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified in the silent halls. He retraced his steps, checking the surrounding rooms, the ancillary storage, even the small ventilation shafts that ran like veins through the building. There was no trace of the thief beyond the footprints fading into the emergency exit corridor. And yet, the absence of struggle suggested something far more alarming. The person responsible was not just skilled. They were intimately familiar with the archive's layout, its routines, and its weaknesses. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. He found himself staring at the empty cabinet, imagining the vanished pages, their parchment brittle yet potent with secrets. Every word, every symbol, every illustration that had survived centuries now rested in unknown hands. The implications were immediate and terrifying. These pages weren't merely documents. They were fragments of a story that had been meticulously hidden, knowledge that had been deemed too dangerous for the world to see. And now someone had them. A sharp noise from the hallway jolted him upright. The security team had gone to check the building perimeter, but he couldn't move from the cabinet's shadow. His mind raced. Who would do this? A collector? A rogue historian? Or something far older, someone who understood the Templar legacy and its hidden power? The possibilities spiraled, each more unsettling than the last. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down in that single empty room, the silent screaming of betrayal and theft. His eyes returned to the faint scuff marks on the floor. He knelt, following them with his gaze, noting the pattern. Each step, each pause, each calculated turn suggested not just urgency, but ritual, as though the thief had performed a sequence that had been repeated countless times in secret across history. The idea was chilling. This wasn't a random theft. It was part of a larger plan, a continuation of an ancient chain of events that stretched from the medieval Templars to the present day. He took a deep breath, forcing his racing mind to slow, then snapped photos of the cabinet, the floor, the footprints. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, could be vital. Then, almost unconsciously, he traced the outline of the cabinet with his fingers, imagining the pages' journey, their flight from the grasp of centuries. The historian in him was consumed by curiosity, the human in him by fear. By the time law enforcement arrived, the scene was carefully preserved, but the tension was palpable. Investigators began asking questions, reviewing footage, analyzing fingerprints and electronic logs. But he knew that the most important trail could not be measured in pixels or prints. It was hidden in knowledge, in history, in the understanding of why these pages had mattered enough to be stolen. As he stepped back, heart still hammering, a single thought dominated his mind. The chase had begun, and he was now in the middle of something far larger than himself. The stolen Templar Scrolls were no longer just relics. They were keys to secrets that had survived centuries of betrayal, war, and cover-ups. And somewhere out there, in the shadows, the person who had taken them was already moving toward the next stage of a plan that had been centuries in the making. The archive was still humming with the tension of the theft, the metallic scent of adrenaline mixing with centuries-old parchment. He moved past the rows of empty shelves toward a side room he had rarely visited, a small, dimly lit vault tucked behind heavy stone walls. It was here, the older custodians whispered, that the most delicate and dangerous artifacts were kept, items whose significance had been deliberately hidden from the world. Tonight, however, the air carried an unfamiliar chill, as if the room itself was aware of the intrusion, aware of the missing pages and their perilous journey into the unknown. His flashlight traced the contours of the walls, revealing carvings long forgotten, symbols etched into stone by hands that had vanished centuries ago. Some were simple Templar crosses, others cryptic patterns he had never seen before. They seemed almost alive in the beam of light, their lines twisting and converging in ways that suggested meaning beyond simple ornamentation. He crouched, inspecting one particular set of scratches near the floor. Tiny, deliberate, almost like a signature left by the thief. Whoever had taken the scrolls had been here before, studying the vault, memorizing the layout, understanding its hidden weaknesses. The vault's heavy doors loomed ahead, reinforced with centuries-old iron bands, its lock mechanisms intricate and precise. But there were no signs of forced entry, no scratches, no tampering marks. The thief had not broken in. They had unlocked a secret that had been concealed for generations. His pulse quickened at the thought. To access this chamber, one had to know its history intimately, to understand its architecture, its patterns, its invisible thresholds. Whoever had done this wasn't just skilled, they were a master of secrets. He knelt to examine the floor, finding faint traces of dust disturbance, subtle enough to escape any casual observer. Each footprint, each scuff told a story. There was a rhythm to the intruder's movements, a deliberate pacing, as if they had followed a precise mental map of the vault. He traced the marks with a gloved finger, imagining the thief moving silently, each step a calculation, each pause a ritual. The implication was terrifying. This was not a random act of theft. It was part of a plan, centuries in the making, with someone executing it in the present day. He activated the small scanning device he always carried, sweeping for residual energy signatures, faint electromagnetic traces left by electronic locks or devices. The scanner beeped softly, mapping a ghost trail of the intruder's passage through the vault. He followed the data, moving past the shelves, past stacks of fragile codices, to a corner where an ancient chest had sat untouched for decades. The dust on its surface was slightly disturbed. A faint scratch along the wood grain caught his eye. Someone had moved this chest, just enough to reveal a hidden compartment beneath, a space that seemed to pulse with hidden intent. He crouched, carefully examining the secret compartment. Inside were fragments of parchment, smaller than the main scrolls, some charred at the edges, others faded into near illegibility. Symbols leapt out at him, lines forming interlocking patterns, circles within triangles, markings that seemed to repeat in a coded language only partially understood. These were not ordinary documents. They were a trail, a breadcrumb left deliberately or accidentally by someone who understood their importance. Whoever had taken the main scrolls had left these fragments intentionally, perhaps as a clue or as a misdirection. His mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Could these fragments be part of a puzzle, leading to the location of the vanished pages? Or were they a warning, a message that the knowledge they contained was too dangerous for anyone to possess? The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing with the weight of centuries, the shadows flickering as though alive. He ran his gloved hands over the parchment, feeling the textures, the age, the faint imprint of letters long faded. Each fragment carried a history, a resonance that seemed to whisper across time, hinting at secrets that had been deliberately hidden from the world. He pulled out his notebook, scribbling every detail, sketching the patterns, noting the angles and alignments of the symbols. Every mark, every curve could be crucial. Somewhere within these markings lay a path, a key to understanding the theft, to tracking the stolen pages before they vanished into the hands of someone who might use them for far darker purposes. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system, but he could feel the presence of the unseen, as if the vault itself were watching, gauging his intentions, waiting to judge him. Suddenly, a movement at the periphery of his vision made him freeze. Shadows shifted, too subtle to be human, but enough to set his nerves on edge. He spun his flashlight in a slow arc, scanning the dark corners, the stacks of documents, the empty spaces between shelves. Nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, a silent acknowledgement that he was not alone, that the trail left behind by the thief was far more dangerous than he had realized. Each step he took now felt heavier, the weight of history pressing down, reminding him that this was no ordinary investigation. The stolen pages were alive with consequence, and anyone who sought them risked being consumed by the very history they pursued. He crouched again at the hidden compartment, carefully extracting one of the smaller fragments. The ink had faded almost to invisibility, but under the beam of his flashlight, the lines and symbols seemed to shimmer faintly, as if recognizing that they had been found. The air in the vault grew colder, the silence stretching taut as he held the fragment in his hands. This was not just a clue. It was a message from the past, a silent witness to centuries of secrecy and betrayal. Whoever had stolen the main pages had expected someone to find this, and now the game was beginning in earnest. He took a deep breath, steadying his racing thoughts. The stolen pages were no longer just lost documents. They were a call to action, a spark that had ignited a chain reaction spanning centuries. The shadows of the vault seemed to close around him, a reminder that the past was never truly dead, and that those who meddled with its secrets could find themselves in mortal peril. The fragments were a whisper, a faint but insistent voice urging him forward. Find the pages before the world's history was rewritten forever. With one last glance at the hidden compartment, he pocketed the fragment and turned toward the exit, moving swiftly, silently. The stakes had never been higher, the danger never more immediate. Somewhere, beyond the walls of the archive, the thief continued their pursuit, and the hunt had officially begun. Every step he took was now part of a race against time, against history, against an adversary whose cunning had been honed over centuries. And in that moment he understood. The vanished pages were not just missing. They were alive with purpose, and someone somewhere would kill to ensure they remained so. The historian's mind raced as he examined the fragments he had just recovered. They were incomplete, fragile, barely holding together after centuries of neglect. Yet even in their imperfection, they whispered secrets that had survived fire, war, and deliberate erasure. He realized, with a jolt of both awe and terror, that these fragments were remnants of something far larger. pages deliberately vanished from the Templar Scrolls, missing not by accident, but by design. They were pieces of a puzzle that had been fragmented across time, dispersed and hidden to keep the world ignorant of truths too dangerous for ordinary eyes. He traced his gloved finger along the inked lines, noting the strange interlocking symbols, the circular patterns that seemed to reference celestial movements, and a series of numbers arranged in a way that suggested a code rather than a simple sequence. Whoever had originally written these pages had intended them to survive, but only for those capable of understanding the language, the symbolism, the hidden logic. The thought made his stomach tighten. The thief who had taken the main pages understood that too, and they knew precisely what they had been looking for. This was not theft for profit. This was theft for power. He moved through the archive, laying the fragments carefully on a table, arranging them according to the patterns he could discern. Each fragment seemed to link to the next in a deliberate sequence, though some were missing entirely, as if to frustrate any who tried to reconstruct the message too quickly. The historian's pulse quickened. The missing pages were not just lost. They had been deliberately removed from the historical record. Someone had wanted them gone, perhaps forever, to bury knowledge that could challenge long-held beliefs about the Templars, their mission, and the secrets they had carried through the ages. As he examined the fragments, he began to reconstruct a timeline, linking the symbols and letters to historical events. The Templars had not merely been knights or financiers. They had been guardians of a hidden knowledge, a body of information so powerful that its very existence had to be erased from public memory. The missing pages, he realized, contained elements of this knowledge, rituals, codes, and possibly maps to sites that even modern historians had long assumed were lost to time. The implications were staggering. Centuries of history could be incomplete, manipulated, or purposefully falsified to conceal truths too dangerous to reveal. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the fragments spread before him. Each line seemed to hum with a silent intensity, as if aware that it had been discovered. There were diagrams, almost alchemical in nature, suggesting formulas or recipes for processes unknown in the modern world. There were sketches of architectural plans that did not correspond to any known Templar sites, and notes in the margins hinting at treasures or sacred relics hidden away, waiting for someone to find them. The more he studied, the more he understood the stakes. These fragments were not mere relics. They were keys to an enormous, carefully hidden secret that had survived centuries of deliberate destruction. He felt the weight of history pressing down, the enormity of the task ahead almost paralyzing. Whoever had stolen the main pages had done so knowing exactly what they contained and why they mattered. The fragments left behind were breadcrumbs, a challenge, or perhaps a warning. He could not know whether the thief had malicious intent, or whether they were part of a network that sought to protect the knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Either way, the trail had begun, and it was a trail that would lead him into dangerous territory, both literally and metaphorically. He carefully wrapped the fragments and placed them into a protective case, realizing that these pieces of history were now as vulnerable as the pages that had vanished. Every movement had to be calculated, every decision deliberate. The thief could be anywhere, watching, waiting, and if they were part of a broader network, as he suspected, then every step he took from this point forward could bring him closer to danger. The missing pages were more than just documents. They were a lifeline to understanding centuries of secrecy, power, and betrayal. His thoughts turned to the history of the Templars themselves, to the events that had led to their downfall and the mysterious disappearance of their archives. The arrests, the confessions under duress, the mass burnings, all of it had been calculated, orchestrated, designed to bury knowledge. And yet, here it was, whispering across the centuries, fragments resurfacing in the hands of a modern historian who could barely comprehend their significance. Someone, somewhere, had kept the secret alive long enough for it to be rediscovered, and now that someone had decided the pages needed to move again. He examined the edges of the fragments under a magnifying glass, noting the delicate script and minute differences in ink and handwriting. These pages had been touched by many hands, some centuries apart, each leaving its mark. This suggested a lineage of guardians, a chain of custody stretching from the original Templars to unknown figures in the present day. The pages were not only historical documents, They were evidence of a living tradition, a network that had survived persecution, war, and suppression to preserve knowledge that could reshape understanding of European history. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the full scope of what he held. The fragments hinted at knowledge powerful enough to inspire devotion, greed, or violence. If the main pages were recovered by someone with malevolent intent, the consequences could ripple across nations. And yet, the puzzle remained tantalizingly incomplete. Without the stolen pages, the fragments offered only glimpses, hints, shadows of the full truth. It was a puzzle that demanded resolution, and he now understood that the chase was far from over. He gathered the fragments and placed them carefully in a secure satchel, locking it with the utmost care. Each step he took leaving the vault was deliberate, each movement measured, aware that unseen eyes might be following, evaluating his actions. Outside, the night had deepened, the streets empty except for distant traffic and the occasional flicker of street lamps. Somewhere beyond the city, the thief or thieves had vanished into the shadows, carrying with them the bulk of the Templar Scrolls, their intentions hidden but undoubtedly powerful. As he left the archive and stepped into the night, he realized that the fragments were more than clues. They were a call to action. The Templar legacy was no longer dormant, no longer confined to the dusty pages of history books. It was alive, urgent, dangerous, and the world was about to discover that the vanished pages were not simply lost. They were the key to a secret that had been protected at all costs for centuries. And someone, somewhere, was willing to do anything to ensure they remained so. The name that had surfaced in the investigation was one he had hoped never to hear. Dr. Elias Morvant, a historian whose obsession with the Templars was whispered about in academic circles, dismissed as eccentricity at best, madness at worst. Morvant had published extensively on the order, but it was his private collections, his hidden archives, and his relentless pursuit of forbidden knowledge that set him apart. His reputation was enigmatic, a combination of brilliance and danger. And now, in the wake of the stolen pages, that reputation took on a chilling relevance. Could Morvant be responsible for the theft? Or was he simply the first to recognize the significance of what had vanished? He dug deeper, scanning Morvant's recent travels, publications, and private communications. There were patterns, subtle yet deliberate. Trips to European cities with historical Templar connections, correspondence with collectors and antiquarians whose names appeared in shadowy circles, and cryptic journal entries hinting at discoveries so profound they could change understanding of history itself. It was clear Morvant had been preparing for this moment for years. The historian felt a prickle of unease. The theft had been executed with precision, knowledge, and intent, traits that Morvant possessed in abundance. But there was more. Something in the timing, the audacity of the act, suggested that this was not merely a pursuit of scholarship. It was something personal, a mission that blurred the line between intellect and obsession. He retraced Morvant's steps over the past few weeks, discovering hotel bookings near the archive, unexplained layovers in cities along the historic Templar routes, and meetings with individuals whose faces he didn't recognize but whose reputations preceded them. These were people rumored to deal in rare manuscripts, artifacts stolen or lost, their dealings conducted in shadows and secrecy. Someone had orchestrated a network to move the pages, and it was impossible to ignore the conclusion. Morvant was at the center of it, whether as planner, executor, or both. The historian imagined Morvant in motion, methodical, careful, and utterly confident. Every detail of the archive's security system, every routine of the custodians, every obscure corridor and hidden alcove, he must have known them all. The theft was not random. It was a calculation, a sequence of actions that required foresight, skill, and an intimate knowledge of history and architecture. Whoever was behind it had anticipated every contingency, and Morvant fit that profile. Yet even as suspicion mounted, he struggled to believe that a man of scholarship would cross the line into outright theft. The line between obsession and madness, between pursuit and crime, had been crossed. He reviewed footage from the nights leading up to the theft. Morvant had been observed in nearby streets, lingering near the archive, his silhouette recorded at times when he could have easily bypassed the cameras unnoticed. There were moments when he appeared distracted, almost waiting for something, or someone. It was as if he were not simply acting alone, but following a plan he had cultivated for years, aware of forces both seen and unseen. The historian's pulse quickened. The stolen pages were not just missing, they were the culmination of a quest, and Morvant, for better or worse, was a key player in a game that had spanned centuries. He thought of the stolen fragments, the small pieces left behind in the vault. They were deliberate, almost taunting. Whoever had taken the main pages had left a trace, a breadcrumb. Morvant's meticulous nature suggested he might be testing the waters, gauging reactions, or even sending a message. The fragments themselves seemed to vibrate with hidden meaning, as though their survival and their placement were part of a ritualistic pursuit. And now, the historian realized, understanding the fragments was not merely an academic exercise. It was essential to tracking Morvant and predicting his next move. A deeper fear began to take hold. If Morvant was capable of orchestrating this theft, he might also be capable of using the knowledge contained in the pages for purposes far beyond mere scholarship. The Templar Scrolls were rumored to contain not only history but codes, rituals, and secrets that could shift power in ways the world was not prepared for. The thought of these pages falling into the hands of someone willing to manipulate or weaponize them was almost unbearable. Each step the historian took to uncover the truth now carried a weight heavier than he had ever known. He mapped out Morvant's possible trajectory, predicting his movements, tracing likely paths across cities, archives, and historical sites that might conceal or reveal more fragments. Every decision, every action Morvant could take was a thread in a tapestry the historian now had to untangle. Time was against him. The thief, the scholar, the obsessed historian, whatever Morvant was, had a head start, and every moment he hesitated increased the distance between them. The stolen pages were more than documents. They were leverage, they were power, and they were alive with consequences. The phone on the table buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was an anonymous tip, a single line of information. He's in Venice. You'll find the next clue where the shadows meet the water. The historian's hand tightened around the receiver, his mind racing to piece together the fragmented puzzle. Venice, a city built on water and secrecy, was a labyrinth, and Morvant's familiarity with Templar history suggested he would know every alley, canal, and hidden chamber. The stolen pages were moving, and so was their orchestrator, invisible yet deliberate, always one step ahead. He packed his notes, fragments carefully secured, and prepared to leave immediately. The weight of centuries pressed on him, the thrill and fear of discovery mixing into a sharp edge that demanded action. Every instinct screamed that Morvant was not only a pursuer of knowledge but a predator in his own right. The chase was no longer theoretical, it was immediate, dangerous, and unavoidable. Somewhere, beyond the city streets and the shadowed canals, Morvant was already advancing toward the next phase of a plan centuries in the making. The historian's journey had become a race against time, intellect, and a man who would stop at nothing to possess the vanished pages. Paris at night was a maze of narrow streets, flickering lanterns, and echoes of centuries past. The historian moved cautiously along the cobblestones, the fragments secured in his satchel, and his mind racing with every possible outcome. The tip had been clear. Follow the shadow network, trace the hidden routes that the Templars themselves might have walked centuries ago. Somewhere beneath the city lay the paths, archives, and secret chambers that had sheltered their knowledge when the world had turned against them. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had studied the Templars extensively, but walking the streets they might have walked, following invisible patterns etched into the city's very architecture, was something else entirely. He turned a corner into a side alley almost swallowed by darkness, and the faint smell of damp stone filled the air. Below him, he could feel the vibrations of the city, trains rumbling through subterranean tunnels, distant footsteps, the faint echo of voices from above. Somewhere here, beneath the familiar cityscape, lay a hidden world, a labyrinth of history that had been carefully preserved, guarded by those who understood its value. The stolen pages were connected to this underground network, and he knew he had to find it before Morvant, or someone even more dangerous, could exploit them. He approached a nondescript building, the kind that drew no attention, doors heavy with age and locks that appeared mundane to the casual observer. Inside, however, the walls were lined with books and scrolls, some centuries old, others written in languages that had fallen from common knowledge. The custodian of this hidden archive, a retired historian whose loyalty to the Templar legacy was unshakable, greeted him with a wary glance. Words were few. The historian could see the tension in the man's eyes. He was not only guarding history but guarding against its theft, its corruption, its misuse. The room itself was a shrine to secrecy. Shelves of manuscripts, maps, and coded messages filled the air with the musty scent of antiquity. Candles flickered, casting shadows that danced across intricate carvings on the walls. Some were simple geometric patterns. Others were symbols of the order, circles intersecting triangles, crosses embedded in labyrinthine designs, all speaking of a world hidden beneath the surface of ordinary history. He traced a hand over the carvings, feeling the grooves, imagining the Templar hands that had left them, hands that had once protected knowledge powerful enough to unsettle empires. His host gestured to a section of the archive concealed behind a false wall. A sliding panel revealed a tunnel descending steeply into the earth, stone steps slick with age and the damp of centuries. This was the path the Templars had used, a network connecting monasteries, hidden chambers, and caches of documents that had survived fire and persecution. As he descended, the weight of history pressed down, the air thick with the whispers of those long dead yet still guarding their secrets. Every echo seemed to carry a message, a warning, or perhaps a challenge. Only those worthy could traverse these paths and emerge with understanding intact. At the bottom of the steps, the historian found himself in a vaulted chamber, ceilings arching high above, walls lined with niches containing artifacts, some mundane, some imbued with significance lost to time. Maps of forgotten lands, diagrams of long-destroyed fortresses, and fragments of manuscripts were scattered across tables, carefully catalogued and protected. The custodian spoke in hushed tones, recounting the history of the tunnels, the lineage of guardians, and the means by which the Templars had preserved knowledge while the world above sought to destroy it. Every word reinforced the urgency of the present mission. The stolen pages had not merely disappeared, they were in motion, and their disappearance was part of a plan centuries in the making. The historian knelt before a table displaying remnants of long-lost codices. Some of the fragments bore markings that mirrored those in his satchel. The alignment, the curves, the cryptic symbols, they were part of a deliberate system, a code spanning generations. Each fragment connected to another, forming a trail designed to test, to challenge, to reveal only to those who understood the patterns. His mind raced, piecing together historical context with the fragment's symbols, the connections stretching from medieval Paris to the present day, from hidden vaults to private libraries. The network was vast, deliberate, and highly protected. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the tunnels behind him. Footsteps, deliberate and measured. He froze, hand instinctively reaching for the small flashlight at his belt. His heart raced, every sense heightened. Was it another historian? A rival collector? Or perhaps a more dangerous entity? Someone who would kill to possess the knowledge, someone who had tracked him here, knowing the vault and its contents? The custodian's eyes narrowed, warning unspoken yet unmistakable. Some secrets were not meant to be discovered lightly. The historian's gaze returned to the fragments before him. In the flickering candlelight, the symbols seemed to pulse faintly, alive with meaning. They were pieces of a grander design, a plan that had endured wars, plagues, and centuries of persecution. The stolen pages were the next key to unlocking that design, and their movement across the modern world had already set forces in motion that he could barely anticipate. Every decision, every step, every word he whispered now mattered. The chase was no longer confined to archives or hidden vaults. It extended into the streets, the cities, and the shadows of the modern world, where centuries-old secrets collided with present-day ambition and danger. He straightened, securing the fragments and preparing to leave the underground labyrinth. The custodian placed a hand on his shoulder, an unspoken acknowledgement of the peril ahead. "The paths are open," he murmured, "but tread carefully. History watches, and not all who guard it are friendly." The historian nodded, understanding that every discovery would bring him closer to the vanished pages and yet deeper into danger. The network of tunnels, the whispers of centuries, and the shadows of the Templars themselves were alive, and the pursuit of knowledge had become a race against a shadowed adversary who knew too well the value of what had been stolen. As he emerged back into the night air of Paris, the city seemed both familiar and strange. The streets, the bridges, the quiet plazas held layers of history invisible to ordinary passers-by. Somewhere within this living labyrinth, the path of the stolen pages continued, the network of the Templars extending its reach into the modern age. He tightened his grip on the fragments, every sense alert. The journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The vanished pages were moving through the world, and he was now in the thick of a hunt that spanned centuries, cities, and shadows, a chase that would demand every ounce of intellect, courage, and cunning he possessed. The moon hung low over Venice, casting long, wavering shadows across canals that glittered with reflected lamplight. The historian stepped carefully onto the worn stone bridge, listening to the gentle lapping of water against ancient buildings, each echo carrying centuries of whispered secrets. Venice was a city built on water and concealment, a place where alleys twisted like veins and every canal could hide 1,000 hidden passages. He knew that Morvant, or whoever was orchestrating the theft, would use the labyrinthine layout to his advantage, and he had to move quickly, tracing invisible lines that connected the present to the Templar past. He followed the clues, each fragment in his possession guiding his path with cryptic precision. Some were straightforward, a symbol etched into a map here, a notation on parchment there, but others required intuition, a deep understanding of Templar history, and a willingness to see patterns where most would see only randomness. The city itself seemed alive with the legacy of the Order, every stone and shadow a potential hiding place, every canal a secret route to treasures long thought lost. He paused at the edge of a narrow alleyway, considering the symbols, and realized the alignment matched the layout of a forgotten convent documented in one of the fragments. The location was small, overlooked in modern records, yet historically significant. As he moved through the alley, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He paused, breath held, listening. The echo was faint, deliberate, almost predatory. Someone was following, but the figure kept a careful distance, blending into the shadows. He could feel the tension in his shoulders tighten, every nerve alert. Morvant, or an accomplice, was close. Whoever it was, they had anticipated his arrival, tracking his movements with precision. The game had become more dangerous, a cat-and-mouse pursuit in a city designed for secrecy and concealment. He ducked into a courtyard, the fragments clutched tightly against his chest. The courtyard was empty, except for a small fountain, its water still and dark under the moonlight. He placed the fragments on a stone ledge, carefully aligning them according to the sequence he had begun reconstructing in Paris. Patterns emerged, diagrams connecting symbols, celestial alignments that suggested hidden chambers beneath the city, and numerical codes that hinted at precise locations. Venice was more than a backdrop. It was a puzzle, a living map designed to conceal and protect the knowledge of the Templars. Hours passed as he pieced together the clues, tracing lines through the fragments that led to a small, unassuming church near the Grand Canal. The church had stood for centuries, its exterior worn by weather, its interior dimly lit and sacred, yet inside, hidden beneath the altar, lay a secret that only those with intimate knowledge could access. He examined the symbols etched into the stone floor and realized they were identical to markings found in the fragments. The alignment of the tiles, the faint scratches on the walls, even the placement of candle holders, all were part of a code, a guide to a hidden chamber. His pulse quickened. The stolen pages had to pass through here, or at least someone had used this location as part of the trail. With careful precision, he pressed a concealed latch beneath the altar. A section of the floor shifted silently, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted upward was musty, tinged with mildew and something older, something that smelled of history itself. Each step down was deliberate, cautious. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing around him, a reminder that the Templars had built these chambers for secrecy ritual, and protection. Every stone he touched had been shaped by hands that had guarded the world's most dangerous secrets. And now, centuries later, he was walking the same path. At the bottom of the staircase, a vaulted chamber unfolded, walls lined with alcoves and niches containing manuscripts, artifacts, and fragments long hidden from the public eye. His flashlight revealed intricate carvings on the stone walls, celestial symbols, interlocking crosses, diagrams that mirrored the fragments in his satchel. The chamber was a physical manifestation of Templar knowledge, a sanctuary where centuries of secrecy had been preserved against time, persecution, and ignorance. He could almost feel the presence of the Order's guardians, unseen yet vigilant, their legacy pulsing through the air. He spread the fragments on a stone table in the center of the chamber. The alignment made sense here in a way it had not in Paris. The symbols, numbers, and diagrams came together, revealing coordinates, dates, and clues that hinted at the location of the stolen pages. The room itself seemed to respond to his discovery, the shadows dancing as if acknowledging the unearthing of a centuries-old secret. Each fragment was a key, a piece of a puzzle that had survived countless attempts to erase it from history. And now, the path forward became terrifyingly clear. The vanished pages were not lost randomly. They were moving along a trail, deliberately guided by someone who knew exactly how to exploit the Templar network. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the chamber's entrance. A deliberate, measured step. He froze, hand gripping the fragments, every muscle taut with tension. The intruder was close. Whoever it was, they were patient, waiting for him to complete his work. The historian's mind raced, calculating escape routes, potential traps, and contingencies. He realized that this chamber, sacred and hidden, was now a battleground, a place where history and present danger collided. As the figure stepped into the light, he recognized the profile instantly, Morvant. The historian's pulse accelerated, not with fear alone but with the realization that the chase had reached a critical juncture. Morvant's expression was calm, almost amused, as if he had been expecting this confrontation. In his eyes burned the intensity of obsession, the fire of someone who would stop at nothing to possess knowledge centuries in the making. The room, filled with symbols and fragments, seemed to vibrate with tension, the air heavy with the weight of secrets and the imminence of revelation. The historian took a cautious step forward, holding the fragments defensively. "You've been orchestrating this for years," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "The pages, they're not yours to take." Morvant's smile was enigmatic, almost reverential, as if he understood the gravity of the moment better than anyone. "They are not mine," he replied softly. "They belong to history, but history does not wait for the timid. Only those willing to act may glimpse its truths." In that moment, the historian understood the depth of the pursuit. This was not mere theft. It was an awakening of the Templar legacy, a collision of knowledge, obsession, and power that had survived centuries of suppression. The chase, the clues, the fragments. They were all part of a network, a living map guiding the next phase of discovery, danger, and revelation. And now, he was at the center of it, facing a man who had devoted his life to following the path laid out centuries ago. The historian followed Morvant through the winding corridors beneath Venice, every step echoing against centuries-old stone. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of salt water seeping from the canals above. Shadows danced in the narrow passages as lantern light flickered, casting ghostly shapes on walls carved with symbols of a forgotten order. Each symbol seemed to pulse with meaning, a language written in secrecy and guarded for centuries. The historian's pulse raced, not only with the physical exertion of the chase but with the weight of the knowledge he carried, the fragments that were part of a story far larger than either of them. They reached a chamber hidden behind a false wall, its entry nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar with its existence. Morvant paused, pressing a sequence of carved symbols that caused the stone to slide silently aside, revealing a stairway that descended further into darkness. The historian's breath caught in his throat. These passages were not merely physical routes. They were part of a design, a network that connected Templar sites across Europe, a maze of secrecy that had been maintained with obsessive precision. Every turn, every hidden door had a purpose. Whoever had built this labyrinth had wanted to ensure that only those with understanding could follow. Descending into the deeper chambers, he noticed the faint glow of inscriptions on the walls, barely visible in the darkness. They were diagrams, alchemical symbols, and cryptic writings that mirrored the fragments he carried. The more he looked, the more he understood. The stolen pages were part of a broader system, a map of knowledge deliberately obscured across time. Whoever possessed the pages could reconstruct the Order's secrets, secrets that were powerful, dangerous, and long hidden from the world above. Morvant moved with confidence, as if every corridor and chamber were mapped into his mind centuries ago. The historian struggled to keep pace, his mind racing to connect fragments to corridors, symbols to stairs, and hints to hidden rooms. The labyrinth was alive, a test in itself. Morvant stopped at a small alcove, illuminating a section of the wall. There, engraved in the stone, was a set of symbols identical to those on the fragments. The historian leaned in, realizing that these symbols were not just markers. They were instructions, a guide to the next location of the vanished pages. The alignment, the angles, and even the subtle markings in the stone indicated precise timing and positioning, as though the pages themselves were part of a ritual passed down for centuries. A low sound made him pause, a faint shifting of stones, almost imperceptible. Someone else had entered the labyrinth. The historian's heart quickened. The shadows in the corridors seemed to stretch and move, and the air grew colder. This network of tunnels was no longer just a historical curiosity. It had become a trap, a stage for forces that had been operating in secret for centuries. Whoever had breached the archives had anticipated pursuit, and it was clear now that the chase had attracted attention beyond Morvant. The historian realized the stakes were higher than ever. This was not merely a race for knowledge, but for survival, and for control over secrets that could rewrite history. He followed Morvant into a larger chamber where the ceiling arched high above, the walls lined with alcoves containing artifacts and manuscripts. Candles flickered, revealing symbols that pulsed faintly in the light, as if acknowledging the presence of those who had been entrusted to guard the Templar legacy. Morvant approached a pedestal at the center of the room and carefully placed the fragments on it. The symbols on the pedestal aligned perfectly with the fragments, creating a pattern that glowed faintly under the candlelight. The historian realized with awe that the Templars had encoded a guide within centuries-old objects, a chain of clues that led to the most powerful knowledge the Order had ever possessed. He traced the lines with his fingers, feeling a connection to the centuries of guardians who had come before. Each fragment, each symbol, each careful placement was deliberate. The historian felt the thrill of understanding, but also the dread of realization. Whoever controlled the next step in this sequence controlled the narrative, the knowledge, and potentially the destiny of what the Templars had hidden. Morvant's eyes met his, calm but intense, as if aware that the historian had understood the significance of what they were uncovering. It was a silent acknowledgement. The next choice would be decisive. The historian followed Morvant down a spiral staircase leading to a subterranean canal, where the water shimmered faintly in the dim light. Gondolas, unremarkable in appearance, were moored silently, awaiting departure. Morvant gestured to one of the boats, and the historian understood that the path would lead them not just through the labyrinth of Venice, but toward the next stage of discovery, where the vanished pages or clues to their location had been moved to ensure secrecy and protection. The water itself was part of the puzzle, a natural extension of the Templars' genius in hiding their legacy in plain sight. As they moved silently along the canals, the historian reflected on the centuries of planning and knowledge that had culminated in this moment. Every step Morvant had taken, every hidden passage, every symbol engraved in stone, had been part of a deliberate chain, guiding the pages and now them through time. The fragments pulsed with importance in his hands, not just as remnants of history, but as keys to understanding a network that had endured the darkest chapters of European history. He realized that the pursuit was no longer about mere scholarship. It was a race against a legacy that had survived wars, betrayal, and secrecy, and now demanded to be understood before it vanished once more. The gondola glided silently through the black water, the city above oblivious to the centuries-old secrets moving beneath its surface. The historian gripped the fragments tightly, every instinct alert, aware that the vanished pages, guided by a plan centuries in the making, were closer than ever. And as the shadows shifted in the narrow canals, he understood that the Templar network was alive, responsive, and watching. Every movement, every choice, every symbol mattered. The chase had entered its most dangerous phase, and the line between knowledge and peril had become impossibly thin. The historian leaned forward in the gondola, eyes scanning the darkened canals of Venice, shadows dancing along the walls of centuries-old buildings. Every ripple of water seemed to echo with the secrets of the city, secrets that had been hidden beneath these streets long before maps were drawn or records kept. The fragments in his satchel pressed against him like a pulse, a rhythm of knowledge that demanded attention. He understood now that these fragments were not merely remnants of history. They were part of a deliberate trail, a carefully orchestrated map guiding him to the vanished pages. The labyrinth of canals was not random. It had been designed to conceal, protect, and test those who sought the Templar legacy. Morvant steered the gondola with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with Venice, each movement precise, measured, almost ritualistic. The historian's mind raced, piecing together the fragments, aligning them with locations and symbols that seemed impossibly hidden in plain sight. Ancient diagrams from the fragments suggested points along the canals where currents intersected with underpasses, small alcoves in the stone walls that could hide objects or people. The historian realized that the vanishing of the Templar pages was more than theft. It was a journey through a living, breathing network that had endured centuries. Each step, each movement, each waterway was part of a larger design, a silent guardian of secrets too dangerous to reveal. They passed under a low archway, the stones slick with years of weather and water. The historian felt the air change as they entered a narrower canal, the walls closing in like the pages of a book. Here, the Templars' planning revealed itself in subtle ways. Small carvings at eye level, symbols etched into hidden alcoves, marks that could be read only by those who knew the language. The fragments he carried were keys to interpreting these marks, revealing paths that would otherwise remain invisible. Each symbol pulsed with significance, guiding him deeper into the city and closer to knowledge that had been deliberately kept from the world. The gondola slowed near a hidden entrance partially submerged in water, a narrow archway barely noticeable unless one knew exactly where to look. Morvant leaned forward, speaking quietly, almost reverently. "This is where it begins," he said. "The real journey." The historian followed him, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of the gondola. The water lapped gently against the stone, masking their movements, concealing them in the shadow of the city. The fragments seemed to hum faintly, as if responding to the proximity of their destination, guiding him forward with a rhythm he could not ignore. Inside the submerged passage, the air was cool, damp, and filled with the faint smell of mildew and decay. Water dripped from the low ceiling, echoing in the tight corridor. He pressed his hand against the wall, tracing the carved symbols that mirrored the fragments. Each mark was deliberate, precise, a code that had survived centuries, waiting for someone to follow. The historian's pulse quickened as he realized the brilliance of the Templar design. Even underwater, even hidden from the world above, the path could be traced and understood by those who carried the keys, the fragments themselves. As they moved deeper, faint lights appeared ahead, reflections of lanterns in hidden alcoves. The historian could see the outlines of chambers carved into the stone, some filled with objects, others empty but marked with symbols that suggested ritual significance. These chambers were preserved, maintained by a lineage of guardians who had survived through generations, keeping the Templar knowledge safe from the outside world. The fragments he carried aligned with these chambers, revealing a sequence, a deliberate path that led him ever closer to the stolen pages. Every step now carried weight, responsibility, and risk. The labyrinth demanded precision, patience, and courage. He paused at one chamber, noticing the subtle markings on the stone floor. They corresponded perfectly with the diagrams in the fragments. He leaned down, tracing the lines with his fingers, understanding that this was a mechanism of sorts, a guide to the next location. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the room itself acknowledged the importance of the discovery. The fragments pulsed faintly against his chest, a reminder that he was following a path deliberately crafted to test, challenge, and reveal. It was a race against time, but also a test of intellect, intuition, and resolve. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels. A soft, deliberate footstep, faint yet distinct. The historian froze, listening intently. Someone was following, moving carefully, deliberately, echoing the path they were tracing. Morvant's expression tightened ever so slightly, eyes narrowing as he read the signs. The pursuit had become layered. The path itself was a challenge, and now there was an active adversary. Whoever followed was intelligent, patient, and dangerous, aware of the significance of the fragments and willing to move silently to intercept them. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the Templar legacy was not merely history. It was alive, reactive, and fiercely guarded. The passage opened into a larger cavern beneath the city, the ceiling arching high above with water channels that fed into hidden aqueducts. Here, relics, manuscripts, and artifacts were stored, some centuries old, some preserved with meticulous care. The historian laid the fragments on a stone pedestal at the center of the chamber. As he did, the symbols on the fragments aligned with carvings on the walls, revealing a map of movements, locations, and instructions that hinted at the current location of the vanished pages. Each symbol, each line, each number was part of a chain that stretched across time, linking the Templar past to the present. Morvant stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the alignment. "You see now," he said quietly. "The pages are not just objects. They are guides, keys, and vessels of knowledge. Whoever controls them controls history, or at least the understanding of it. And history does not reveal itself lightly." The historian nodded, aware that they were standing at the crossroads of discovery and danger, the fragments pulsing with significance, guiding them toward a revelation that could reshape the understanding of the Templar Order forever. The cavern beneath Venice seemed to breathe with history, every arch of stone whispering secrets carried for centuries. The historian traced the carvings etched into the walls, their meaning slowly revealing itself in alignment with the fragments he held. These weren't just symbols, they were instructions, a map, a coded language of the Templars that had been meticulously designed to endure the ages. The air smelled of damp stone and history, thick with anticipation. He realized with a shiver that every step he had taken since Paris had led him here, to a junction where the past and present collided, where centuries-old designs awaited their intended reader. Morvant's gaze was unwavering as he observed the historian's movements, noting the precision with which he aligned the fragments on the pedestal. "Every mark, every angle, every gap has a reason," he murmured. The Templars were architects of knowledge, not just of fortresses and swords. They built networks of thought, encoded in stone, paper, and ritual, and these fragments are the keys to unlocking them. The historian nodded, feeling both awe and unease. The magnitude of what he held was dizzying. This was no ordinary manuscript, no mere historical curiosity. It was a system, a living map, a chain of secrets that connected people, places, and events across centuries. He followed the symbols from the pedestal to a small side chamber, nearly hidden from view. The walls were lined with niches, each containing objects that seemed mundane at first glance. Vials, manuscripts, carved stones. Yet the fragments revealed their purpose. When placed in precise alignment, the symbols projected a path, a series of coordinates that pointed toward a hidden chamber within the city above. The historian's pulse quickened. The vanished pages were not only concealed, they were being guided along a deliberate path, a trail set centuries ago by the very architects of the Templar Order. As he traced the symbols, he realized that the alignment was not just physical, it was temporal. Certain markers suggested that actions needed to occur at specific times, dates, or celestial alignments. The Templars had encoded their knowledge in such a way that it could not be accessed randomly. but only by those who understood both the spatial and temporal dimensions. The historian felt a thrill mingled with fear. The pursuit was no longer simply a matter of geography. It was a race against timing, pattern, and hidden intelligence. Whoever controlled the next step would dictate the movement of the vanished pages, potentially unlocking their secrets before anyone else could. A faint sound echoed through the cavern, soft but deliberate. The historian froze, listening intently. Footsteps? Or perhaps the shifting of stone within hidden compartments. He realized that the labyrinth itself was a guardian, its passages designed to alert or deter intruders. He took careful steps toward a hidden staircase, noting every engraving, every indentation, every sign that aligned with the fragments. The system was brilliant and dangerous, a maze that required intellect, patience, and courage to navigate. The vanished pages were protected not just by human hands but by centuries of deliberate design, and he now understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Morvant followed closely, silent but watchful. "They anticipated seekers," he said softly, almost reverently. The Templars did not trust history to survive in the open. They encoded it, hid it, and challenged anyone who might follow. Only those persistent enough to read the signs could proceed. The rest would be lost. The historian felt a chill. Morvant's words underscored the peril of their quest. The Templars had created not just a trail, but a test, a series of trials designed to filter seekers, allowing only the most committed, or the most dangerous, to uncover their deepest secrets. The staircase led them to a narrow corridor that opened into a vaulted chamber, partially submerged in water. The floor shimmered with the reflection of lanterns, revealing symbols etched into the stone just beneath the surface. He knelt, placing the fragments in precise alignment with the carvings, feeling a connection across centuries. The chamber seemed to respond, shadows shifting as if acknowledging the proper placement, revealing a hidden passage at the far end. The historian's breath caught. This was it, the next step in the journey, the path that the vanished pages had followed, and perhaps the first tangible clue to their current location. As he stepped toward the newly revealed passage, he noticed faint markings along the walls, small scratches, barely visible, yet unmistakably deliberate. They were signs of recent activity. Someone else had been here, following or guiding the pages. The historian realized with sudden clarity that they were not alone in the pursuit. The vanished pages were not merely historical artifacts. They were active objects of desire, drawing seekers, scholars, and perhaps predators into a dangerous game that spanned centuries. The shadows of the chamber seemed to lengthen, carrying with them the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting, judging. He moved carefully, fragments in hand, through the passage toward a secondary chamber. The air was cooler, damp, filled with the smell of water and stone. The faint hum of flowing currents suggested that this hidden vault connected to the canals above, a living network through which the pages could move unseen. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him, the magnitude of the Templar legacy guiding his every step. Every detail mattered: the alignment of stones, the placement of symbols, the timing of movement. One misstep and the trail could be lost forever or fall into the wrong hands. Morvant paused, watching the historian with intensity. "This is where many have faltered," he said. "They sought the knowledge, but they could not follow the path. They failed not because they lacked strength, but because they could not understand the design. Every step, every mark, every fragment is part of a system that will not yield its secrets lightly." The historian nodded, understanding the truth in the words. The vanished pages were not just hidden. They were alive in their design, a challenge that required intellect, patience, and courage. And now, at the heart of the labyrinth, he was ready to continue the pursuit, following the Templar trail to its next revelation. The historian stepped cautiously into the chamber at the far end of the passage, the flickering light of his lantern reflecting on damp stone walls etched with centuries-old symbols. The room was small but intricate, a testament to the Templars' obsession with precision, secrecy, and encoded knowledge. Every surface was alive with signs, carvings, and etchings, seemingly random to an untrained eye, but perfectly aligned with the fragments in his possession. As he knelt to align the pieces, he felt a strange energy, as though the chamber itself acknowledged their presence. The Templars had not merely hidden the pages, they had created an environment that responded to those who understood their codes. Morven's silhouette moved quietly behind him, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the carvings as if reading invisible lines connecting them to centuries-old events. "The Order anticipated seekers like us," he murmured. "Not every fragment was meant to be found. Some were tests, some were traps, and some were guidance, but all were deliberate." The historian nodded, absorbing the weight of the words. This was no ordinary quest. It was a confrontation with a legacy designed to challenge intellect, patience, and courage. The Templars had survived not through brute strength, but through careful orchestration, subtlety, and foresight. Every detail here, every mark, every groove was a part of their enduring defense of knowledge. He traced the carvings with his fingers, aligning the fragments on a stone pedestal in the center of the chamber. The fragments seemed to respond, their symbols reflecting and amplifying the carvings on the walls, revealing patterns and directions that had been invisible moments before. He realized that the chamber was not just a storage place. It was an active node in a vast network of Templar knowledge. The vanished pages were moving along this network, guided by hidden pathways and the logic embedded in these symbols. Whoever could interpret them could reconstruct the route, but any misstep could mean losing the trail forever. A faint trickle of water echoed from a side tunnel, breaking the silence of the chamber. The historian's pulse quickened. Venice, with its canals and hidden passages, had been designed for concealment, and these underground chambers were extensions of that brilliance. He understood that the water itself was a tool, a living component of the Templar system. Small currents could obscure movement, hide objects, or create sounds that masked human presence. The pursuit of the vanished pages was not just a matter of intellect. It was also a navigation of an environment designed to confound and protect. He turned his attention to the side walls, where small alcoves held artifacts, manuscripts, and objects that appeared mundane but were encoded with meaning. Some contained numerical codes, others cryptic symbols, and a few held fragments that mirrored the ones in his satchel. Aligning these correctly produced a faint reflection of light onto the floor, indicating the direction of the next chamber. The historian's heart raced. This was no random placement. It was a calculated map, designed to convey knowledge while concealing it from those unable to interpret the signs. The Templars had built a system where only the worthy or the relentless could follow the path to its conclusion. Morvant stepped closer, his face illuminated by the lantern, eyes glinting with a mix of excitement and reverence. "Every chamber, every corridor, every fragment is a piece of a puzzle that spans centuries," he whispered. "The vanished pages are not merely documents. They are keys, codes, and vessels of power. Whoever possesses them has a profound advantage, not just over knowledge, but over history itself." The historian shivered, understanding that the pursuit had evolved. This was no longer about retrieving stolen manuscripts. It was about uncovering a living system of encoded intelligence that had survived wars, suppression, and time itself. He carefully followed the pattern indicated by the light reflections and symbols, moving toward a narrow archway at the far end of the chamber. The floor beneath him was uneven, worn smooth by centuries of feet that had walked this labyrinth. Water pooled in shallow areas, reflecting distorted images of the ceiling, adding to the sense of mystery and danger. Every step was measured, every handhold deliberate. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down, reminding him that the Templars had designed these chambers with foresight and cunning, to protect knowledge from the careless, the unworthy, or the greedy. As he reached the archway, he noticed faint scratches on the stone walls, marks of recent activity. Someone else had been here, following the path or attempting to manipulate it. The historian's mind raced. The pursuit was no longer confined to the Templar network. It had extended into the modern world, and now he realized the trail of the vanished pages was actively contested. Every movement mattered. Every decision could have consequences that reached beyond the chamber. The Templar system had been designed for survival, but it was still vulnerable to the clever, the patient, and the determined. The archway opened into a larger subterranean chamber, its ceiling vaulted and supported by carved stone columns. Water channels ran along the edges, feeding into hidden aqueducts, some of which connected to canals above. The historian placed the fragments carefully on a pedestal at the chamber's center, aligning them with the carvings on the walls. Symbols began to illuminate faintly under the lantern light, revealing coordinates and instructions that hinted at the next location of the vanished pages. The alignment was perfect, a testament to the Templars' meticulous planning. Every detail mattered, every symbol was a guide, and every misinterpretation could mislead or trap a seeker. Morvant observed silently, his expression calm but intense. "You see now," he said quietly, "the vanished pages are not just lost, they are alive in their design. They move along a path, guided by intention and encoded logic. To follow them is to step into the legacy of the Templars themselves." The historian felt a chill, a mixture of awe and apprehension. They were standing at a crossroads where history, intellect, and danger converged. The pursuit of the vanished pages was no longer merely a quest. It was a confrontation with the ingenuity, obsession, and foresight of a centuries-old order whose legacy demanded both respect and caution. The historian advanced into the next chamber, a low vaulted space barely wide enough to accommodate the stone pedestal at its center. The walls were lined with carved niches, some containing fragmented manuscripts, others empty but marked with faint etchings that hinted at prior occupancy. Each mark, each symbol, resonated with the fragments he carried, as though the centuries-old chamber itself recognized the alignment of knowledge in his hands. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the centuries of guardianship, of secrets carefully encoded and concealed, now converging in this subterranean labyrinth. Water trickled along the edges of the stone floor, whispering as it ran through channels built to carry it unseen across Venice's hidden veins. The sound was subtle, yet rhythmic, like a heartbeat, marking the flow of time and the deliberate design of the Templars who had crafted this place. The historian knelt to align the fragments once more, noticing faint carvings on the pedestal that had gone unnoticed until now. They formed a sequence, a code spanning symbols, numbers, and celestial markings, which, when interpreted, revealed the direction to the next node in the network. Every detail was deliberate, designed to guide those who could decode it and to mislead those who could not. Morvant moved quietly behind him, his presence calm but watchful. "The Templars did not merely hide documents," he said in a low voice. "They engineered pathways of understanding. Every chamber is a lesson, every symbol a test. The vanished pages are a prize, yes, but also a responsibility. To follow their trail is to engage with a legacy that demands clarity, caution, and courage." The historian nodded, understanding the gravity of the journey. They were not simply following a physical path but retracing centuries of coded knowledge, a map woven into the fabric of the city itself. As he continued, the historian's eyes caught a faint glimmer on the far wall, a thin slit, almost imperceptible, through which a beam of light fell, illuminating a portion of the floor. He approached carefully and traced the light to a set of carvings that corresponded perfectly with the fragments. These carvings revealed a sequence, a pattern of movements that suggested timing and placement, almost like a ritual. He realized that the Templars had considered not just location, but timing, angles, and even the influence of light. The trail of the vanished pages was orchestrated with precision across centuries, every step codified in stone, manuscript, and ritual. A soft, almost imperceptible echo reached his ears, footsteps distant but deliberate. The historian stiffened. Someone else was in the labyrinth. The realization brought a mix of urgency and dread. The Templar network had not merely been a static system. It was active, alive, and now potentially contested. Whoever pursued the vanished pages alongside him was clever, patient, and dangerous. He took a cautious breath, steadying himself, aware that a misstep could endanger both his pursuit and the fragments. Morvant gestured to a small alcove partially hidden behind a column. "The next step is here," he whispered. "But notice the markings, they indicate more than direction. They indicate intention." The pages were moved with purpose, not randomly across time and space. Whoever guides them now follows that same purpose. The historian leaned closer, examining the alcove. Faint scratches and markings suggested recent human activity. Someone had been here, carefully handling or retrieving objects, leaving subtle clues for those who could interpret them. It was evidence that the pursuit was no longer just historical, it was dangerously present. He aligned the fragments against the carvings in the alcove. A pattern emerged, revealing a sequence of symbols that led to a submerged tunnel branching from the chamber. The water there glimmered faintly, reflecting lantern light and hinting at a passage that connected directly to Venice's secret canals. The historian understood that this network had been designed to allow movement of documents, artifacts, and knowledge without detection. The vanished pages had traveled this path before, and now he and Morvant were retracing it, following a trail laid centuries earlier, one step behind and one step ahead simultaneously. The corridor narrowed as he progressed, water rising slightly at the edges of the stone floor. The air grew damp, filled with the smell of centuries-old stone and stagnant water. Symbols etched along the walls guided him onward, each fragment aligning perfectly with the carvings, revealing the logic of movement through the labyrinth. The Templars had not only preserved their knowledge, they had engineered a living map, responsive to those who understood the patterns and resistant to anyone else. Every detail mattered. Placement, timing, and interpretation were all part of a delicate balance that ensured only the worthy could follow. Morvant's voice broke the silence, quiet but intense. "This is where many seekers fail," he said. "They interpret fragments, but they do not understand the design. The labyrinth tests perception, patience, and understanding. The pages are not lost, they are guided. And the guide is always watching." The historian felt a chill, the weight of the centuries pressing down as he realized the stakes were higher than ever. This pursuit was not just academic. It was a confrontation with centuries of intelligence, foresight, and hidden planning. The Templar legacy demanded respect, and he understood now that every decision, every alignment, and every step carried enormous consequences. As he approached the end of the chamber, he saw a small stone pedestal, partially submerged, bearing symbols that mirrored the fragments in his hands. Carefully, he placed them in alignment, feeling a resonance, a pulse as though the chamber itself acknowledged their completion. A section of the far wall shifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending further into darkness. The historian's breath caught. This was it, the next crucial step, deeper into the labyrinth, closer than ever to the vanished pages and the truth they concealed. The pursuit was no longer merely historical. It was immediate, dangerous, and unavoidable, a test of intellect, courage, and perseverance that had been centuries in the making. The historian descended the narrow stone staircase into a cavernous chamber. The walls slick with moisture and etched with symbols so intricate they seemed to ripple under the faint glow of his lantern. The air was heavy, damp, and carried the faint scent of mold mixed with something older, something almost metallic, like the memory of centuries of hidden secrets. Every footstep echoed, a reminder that they were far beneath the bustling city above, moving through spaces that had not seen a human in decades, perhaps centuries. This was no ordinary hidden passage. It was a sanctuary designed to test understanding, patience, and perception. The fragments in his hands seemed to pulse with significance as he approached the center of the chamber. A stone pedestal surrounded by shallow pools of water that reflected the flickering lantern light. The carvings on the pedestal were complex, a series of symbols, numbers, and celestial markings that mirrored those in the fragments. As he carefully aligned the pieces, he realized that the Templars had created a three-dimensional map, one that combined location, timing, and ritual. The vanished pages were not simply hidden. They were being guided along a meticulously engineered system, a living puzzle that had survived centuries of war, suppression, and human greed. Morvant observed quietly, his eyes scanning the walls and the symbols etched into the floor. "Every step we take," he murmured, "has already been anticipated." The Templars understood movement, anticipation, and secrecy. This chamber is not just a resting place. It is a relay, a node in a network that channels knowledge, guiding the pages to their next destination. To understand it, you must think like they did, see patterns where none are obvious, and trust the alignment of symbols over instinct alone. The historian nodded, feeling the weight of those words. This was more than a puzzle. It was a living testament to foresight and ingenuity, a network that had endured centuries because of its subtlety and precision. He traced the carvings along the pedestal, each line, each etching revealing a sequence, a direction, a set of instructions that were almost imperceptible to the casual observer. These were not merely guides. They were active mechanisms of transmission, a system that encoded both movement and meaning. The historian's pulse quickened as he realized that the vanished pages had followed this path before, moving through hidden corridors, submerged tunnels, and secret chambers, each carefully chosen to protect their contents from the unworthy. Every decision the Templars had made had been deliberate, anticipating seekers, threats, and the passage of time. A faint echo drew his attention to a corner of the chamber. The sound was soft but deliberate, the shifting of stones perhaps, or someone else moving within the labyrinth. The historian stiffened. He had suspected they were being followed, and now it was clear. The pursuit was active, alive, and dangerously close. The labyrinth, designed as a safeguard, was becoming a stage for confrontation. The Templars had protected the pages with ingenuity, but the modern world introduced unpredictability. Others were seeking the same knowledge, and they would not hesitate to take it by force. Morvant gestured toward a series of alcoves partially submerged in water. These contained secondary markers, checkpoints in the system. They were not meant to be found by accident. Only those who understand the sequence of alignment and timing can proceed safely. Misinterpretation leads to dead ends or worse. The historian approached one alcove, tracing faint markings in the stone. Symbols corresponding perfectly with the fragments appeared, revealing subtle hints of a hidden mechanism. A narrow tunnel concealed by water, leading to a secondary chamber. It was as though the labyrinth itself were a living organism, responsive to those who understood its language. The historian moved carefully, aware of the rising tension in the air. Each step brought him closer to understanding the trail of the vanished pages. Yet the complexity of the system demanded patience and precision. The Templars had encoded knowledge in 3 dimensions: spatial orientation, timing, and symbolic alignment. To deviate from the path was to risk failure, potentially losing the trail forever or stepping into unseen traps designed to protect the legacy. The labyrinth was more than architecture. It was a safeguard, a guardian, and now a test of endurance and intellect. He reached a shallow pool in the center of the chamber, the water reflecting faint etchings on the ceiling above. Placing the fragments carefully, he aligned them with the carvings on the floor and walls. The symbols seemed to glow faintly, responding to the proper alignment. A section of the stone wall shifted, revealing a hidden archway leading deeper into the labyrinth. The historian's heart pounded. This was the path the vanished pages had traveled, guided through centuries of clever design. The Templars had not only hidden their knowledge, they had engineered a journey that would reveal the truth only to those capable of following it. As they prepared to move forward, he noticed faint scratches along the archway, evidence of recent activity. Someone else had been here, following the path, interpreting the same symbols. The historian realized that the pursuit was no longer merely a matter of history. It was active, present, and urgent. Whoever else was following would reach the pages if they could read the code as deftly as he had. Every step now carried weight, every decision a potential advantage or risk. The labyrinth demanded precision, vigilance, and courage, and the consequences of error could be severe. Morvant glanced at him, his expression grave but focused. This is where the labyrinth tests your understanding most severely. The Templars designed this sequence to filter seekers, to ensure only those persistent, intelligent, and careful enough could continue. The vanished pages are not lost. They are alive in the design. Follow it accurately, and they will reveal themselves. Fail, and the trail vanishes into centuries of secrecy. The historian nodded, feeling the enormity of the responsibility. They were stepping into the heart of a system engineered to endure history itself, a living testament to the Templars' foresight, cunning, and obsession with secrecy. He took a deep breath, adjusting the fragments in his hands, and stepped forward into the archway, ready to continue the pursuit. The labyrinth had tested him, challenged him, and revealed its secrets, but the true path, the next chapter in the journey toward the vanished pages, was still ahead. And as he moved deeper, he felt a pulse, subtle but undeniable, as though the labyrinth itself acknowledged that he was finally beginning to understand. The narrow archway opened into a vaulted chamber that seemed impossibly ancient, the walls carved with intricate symbols, patterns, and cryptic inscriptions that had weathered centuries, yet retained a strange brilliance under the flickering lantern light. The historian stepped cautiously, aware that every footfall echoed through the cavern like a signal, a declaration of presence to whatever guardians, human or otherwise, might be observing. The fragments in his hands seemed to vibrate, as though aware that the next step in the journey was critical, a pivotal moment in a centuries-long sequence orchestrated by minds far older and more meticulous than his own. Morvant moved ahead with silent precision, gesturing to the walls as he passed. "Every chamber tells a story," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the cavern. "Not just of the order, but of intent. The Templars embedded their knowledge in space itself, in dimensions that guide the seeker as much as the written fragments do. Every symbol, every gap, every faint groove is deliberate. Miss one and the trail could be lost forever." The historian nodded, recognizing the truth in the words. They were no longer mere observers of history, they were participants in it, stepping through a living architecture designed to protect and guide the vanishing pages. He crouched near a series of alcoves, each containing objects that appeared mundane at first glance. Small vials, carved stones, and fragments of parchment. But as he aligned the fragments with the carvings on the wall, a pattern emerged, revealing instructions encoded in 3 dimensions. The alcoves were checkpoints designed to teach, test, and guide. The Templars had anticipated the inevitability of seekers, creating a path that filtered the curious from the capable. Only by understanding the subtle interplay of symbols, angles, and timing could one proceed safely. The historian felt a thrill mingled with tension. The complexity of the system was breathtaking, almost overwhelming, yet the alignment of the fragments illuminated the next step. He noticed the floor beneath the alcoves was slightly uneven, with narrow channels etched into the stone, carrying water from the hidden aqueducts. The gentle ripple of the water reflected faint light onto the carvings above, highlighting details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. The Templars had designed not just for concealment but for revelation, using environmental elements to interact with the encoded knowledge. The historian realized that even the water had a purpose, guiding perception, reflecting symbols, and subtly signaling the correct sequence of movements. Every element in this chamber was deliberate, part of a grand design that had survived wars, fires, and centuries of human neglect. As he studied the carvings, a faint draft brushed against his neck. He turned sharply, sensing movement in the shadows, but saw nothing, only the play of light and stone. Yet the feeling persisted. They were not alone. The labyrinth had always been a guardian, but now it seemed alive in a new way, alert to their presence, warning of other seekers who might have traced the same path. The historian's pulse quickened, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through him. Whoever else was following the fragments was patient, intelligent, and possibly dangerous, aware of the stakes involved in reaching the vanished pages. Morvant approached a pedestal in the center of the chamber, his lantern illuminating a series of carvings that seemed almost to glow in response to the fragment alignment. "This is the heart of the sequence," he said, voice low, almost reverent. The Templars understood that knowledge is power, but only if it is earned. They designed this chamber to filter seekers, to challenge perception, patience, and intellect. The pages are not merely hidden, they are guided, moving along a path that tests every skill required to find them. The historian leaned over, carefully aligning the fragments with the carvings. A faint resonance pulsed through the stone, subtle but undeniable, as though the chamber itself recognized that the correct sequence had been activated. The alignment revealed a hidden mechanism, A section of the wall slid silently aside, exposing a narrow tunnel descending deeper into darkness. The historian's breath caught. The Templars had built not just a labyrinth of stone but a dynamic system, a living puzzle that moved, shifted, and revealed its next path only to those who understood the pattern. The vanished pages were still in motion, guided through this centuries-old network, and now he and Morvant were following their path, a step behind the knowledge but a step closer to revelation. He moved cautiously into the tunnel, the walls slick with moisture, symbols etched faintly along the sides. The air was cooler here, heavier, filled with the scent of centuries-old stone and stagnant water. He traced the carvings, matching them meticulously with the fragments in his hands, and realized that the Templars had encoded movement in a way that combined geography, physics, and timing. Even the tiniest misalignment could throw off the trail, misdirect a seeker, or conceal the next stage. The labyrinth was alive, a test of intellect and patience, and only by respecting the system could one proceed safely. As they progressed, the tunnel opened into a small chamber partially submerged in water. Faint carvings on the walls indicated positions for the fragments, with subtle grooves directing the placement precisely. The historian set the pieces down, aligning each symbol with the stone etchings. Light reflected off the water in a precise pattern, illuminating a small section of the ceiling that concealed a secondary passage. He realized the brilliance of the design. The Templars had created layers of concealment, systems within systems, all designed to preserve the vanished pages and ensure only the capable could access them. Morvant's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and solemnity. "We are close," he whispered. "Close enough to feel the intent of centuries, close enough to understand the care, the foresight, and the obsession that guided these creations. The pages are not lost. They are moving, alive in the design, waiting for the worthy to follow." The historian felt a chill run through him, the weight of history pressing down. Awareness mingled with awe. They were on the threshold of a revelation, about to step into the culmination of centuries of secrecy, strategy, and intellect carefully hidden beneath the streets of Venice. The chamber into which the tunnel opened was unlike any they had seen before. The vaulted ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed almost alive. Water ran through narrow channels along the stone floor, creating soft, hypnotic echoes that bounced across the walls and amplified the sense of isolation. The air was heavy and damp, carrying the faint scent of old stone, mold, and something more elusive, almost metallic, the lingering presence of history itself. The historian's lantern illuminated carvings along the walls, each line, symbol, and mark resonating with the fragments he carried. This chamber felt like the heart of the labyrinth, a nexus where centuries of design converged in one concentrated point of secrecy and revelation. He stepped cautiously, aware that each movement could have consequences. The fragments pulsed faintly in his hands, a subtle reminder that they were more than inert remnants. They were keys, guides, and signals to a hidden structure meticulously maintained over centuries. The historian studied the carvings carefully, tracing them with his fingers and matching them to the fragment's symbols. A pattern began to emerge, revealing a sequence of placements and movements that dictated the chamber's logic. The Templars had encoded not only knowledge but action, a series of steps that needed to be performed with precision to uncover the next clue. Every misstep risked losing the path entirely. Morvant remained close, his presence calm but vigilant, his eyes scanning every detail, as if the walls themselves could betray secrets to a careless observer. "Notice the interplay between water, light, and symbol," he whispered. The Templars used their environment as a guide. Reflections, shadows, and angles all carry meaning. To read the system, you must see it as they did, as an integrated whole. The pages are not merely hidden, they are choreographed through space and time. The historian nodded, absorbing the magnitude of what lay before them. This was more than a puzzle. It was a dynamic system, alive in design and impervious to the inattentive or the impatient. He approached a central pedestal, partially submerged in the shallow water that filled the chamber. Symbols etched along its sides mirrored those on the fragments, but in subtle variations that suggested the next step involved more than simple alignment. He leaned closer, observing that certain grooves interacted with the reflections of light in the water, projecting lines onto the ceiling and walls that revealed the hidden trajectory of the vanished pages. The Templars had anticipated that only those who understood the interaction between material, light, and symbol would succeed. The realization sent a shiver down the historian's spine. He was not merely uncovering history. He was participating in it, stepping into a design that had survived centuries with a precision that bordered on obsession. The historian carefully aligned the fragments along the pedestal, observing the subtle responses in the carvings. Faint glimmers of reflected light shifted, revealing a concealed archway in the far corner of the chamber. It was a passage hidden in plain sight, only visible when the symbols, water, and light were correctly interpreted. He felt a rush of anticipation. The vanished pages had traveled this path, guided by the same logic and intention, and now he was tracing their journey step by step, piecing together the movement of knowledge across centuries. Morvant stepped closer, his voice low and almost reverent. "The Templars understood that knowledge is living," he said. "They did not merely hide the pages. They orchestrated their journey, guiding them through time and space. Every symbol, every reflection, every drop of water is intentional. And now we are following that path, walking in the footsteps of those who guarded this secret for centuries." The historian felt the weight of those words, the gravity of the moment. They were not merely seekers. They were witnesses to a legacy meticulously designed to endure the ages. A sudden sound, soft but deliberate, echoed through the chamber. The historian stiffened, listening intently. Footsteps? A shifting of stone? He could not be sure, but the realization was immediate and chilling. They were not alone. The labyrinth was not merely a safeguard. It was also a stage, and others might have traced this path, seeking the same pages, guided by the same logic. The pursuit was no longer abstract or historical. It was immediate, tangible, and dangerous. Every movement now carried stakes far higher than simple discovery. He traced the carvings along the walls, finding faint notches that corresponded perfectly with the fragments. The system was elegantly cruel, testing intellect, perception, and patience simultaneously. Each correct alignment revealed another hidden layer, a mechanism that opened a previously invisible compartment, containing further fragments, symbols, and clues. The historian realized that the labyrinth was not static. It was an active guardian, responding to correct interpretations, guiding the worthy forward while obscuring the path to those who failed. Morvant gestured toward a series of alcoves partially submerged in water, containing manuscripts, vials, and carved stones. "These are checkpoints," he explained. "They are not obstacles but tests. Each one ensures that the seeker is deliberate, precise, and worthy of proceeding. The pages are not simply hidden. They are guarded by intellect, foresight, and centuries of deliberate design." The historian nodded, recognizing the brilliance and danger of the system. Every chamber, every alignment, every symbol had been created to protect the Templar legacy from the careless, the impatient, and the unworthy. With meticulous care, he placed the fragments in the central alcove, aligning each symbol with the carvings etched into the stone. As the last piece clicked into place, the chamber seemed to shift subtly. The water's reflection deepened, shadows rearranged, and a section of the far wall began to move, revealing a narrow tunnel descending further into darkness. The historian's heart raced. This was the next step in the journey, a continuation of a centuries-old path that had guided the vanished pages, protected by ingenuity, secrecy, and the relentless foresight of the Templar order. The tunnel beyond the chamber was narrow and damp, the air heavy with the scent of stagnant water and centuries-old stone. Each step echoed softly, bouncing across the walls in irregular patterns that made it impossible to tell if someone or something was following. The historian moved cautiously, fragments in hand, acutely aware of the responsibility he carried. These were not just pieces of parchment. They were keys to a system meticulously orchestrated by the Templars, a legacy of knowledge, strategy, and secrecy that had survived wars, betrayals, and centuries of decay. The labyrinth beneath Venice was alive, and it was testing him at every step. Morvant's lantern illuminated carvings along the tunnel walls, symbols so intricate they seemed to shimmer in the faint light. "Notice the progression," he whispered. "The order did not scatter clues randomly. Every mark leads to the next. The labyrinth is a living sequence, designed to filter seekers. Only those patient and precise enough can continue." The historian nodded, tracing the symbols carefully. He felt a strange resonance, a connection not just to the Templars but to centuries of seekers who had walked similar paths, some failing, others never returning. The vanished pages were not merely hidden, they were alive in their design, moving through a system that demanded intelligence, intuition, and unwavering focus. The floor sloped gently downward, and water began to rise slightly around the edges, forming shallow pools that reflected the flickering lanterns. He carefully avoided stepping in the deeper sections, understanding that even a minor misstep could trigger a hidden mechanism, one that might misalign the fragments or conceal the next pathway. Every inch of the labyrinth was deliberate, a careful balance of concealment, guidance, and trial. The Templars had engineered not just walls and corridors, but an entire sensory environment that tested intellect, perception, and composure. Each reflection, shadow, and drip of water carried meaning, part of the encoded trail the vanished pages had traveled. The historian stopped at a section of wall covered in subtle carvings, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye. He knelt, placing the fragments against the stone. A sequence revealed itself, a pattern of angles, gaps, and etchings that formed a map within the chamber, guiding him toward a secondary alcove. The Templars had anticipated seekers like him, crafting layers of meaning that could only be interpreted by aligning fragments with carvings, light, and reflection. The chamber seemed to breathe with recognition as he worked, shadows shifting subtly as if acknowledging the correctness of his alignment. Morvant stepped closer, studying the carvings with intense concentration. "This section," he said, his voice low, "is a threshold. The Templars designed it to test not only intellect but composure. You can solve the sequence, but if you hesitate or doubt, you risk misreading the symbols. The pages are protected not just by walls and water, but by the mind itself. Only those who think, observe, and act deliberately may proceed." The historian felt a chill, understanding that the labyrinth was not merely architectural but psychological. A system of challenges that weighed patience, observation, and courage in equal measure. He traced the carvings along the walls, aligning each fragment meticulously. The symbols began to resonate, forming a path that led to a partially submerged alcove. Within the alcove were additional fragments, hidden yet visible only when the light reflected at a precise angle. He adjusted the lantern, angling it carefully, and discovered a series of carvings that revealed the next step in the sequence. The chamber, the tunnel, and the fragments were all part of a synchronized system, a moving puzzle that had endured centuries. The historian's pulse quickened. Every alignment brought him closer to understanding the Templars' design, but also closer to confronting those who might be pursuing the same trail. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file. The walls here were slick with moisture, and faint scratches suggested that someone else had passed through recently. The historian's instincts screamed caution. Whoever else was following the path of the vanished pages was not merely curious. They were determined, knowledgeable, and potentially dangerous. The labyrinth was no longer only a test of intellect. It had become a race, a confrontation of strategy and skill that stretched across centuries. The Templars had built a system to protect knowledge, but it was still vulnerable to human cunning. Every step now carried the weight of both history and immediacy. He noticed a small pool reflecting an obscure symbol on the ceiling. Kneeling, he carefully aligned the fragments, watching as the reflection illuminated a hidden seam in the wall. The seam shifted with subtle pressure, revealing a narrow passage descending further into darkness. His breath caught. This was the next stage of the labyrinth, the continuation of a centuries-old path that had guided the vanished pages through Venice. The Templars had not only hidden their knowledge, they had engineered it to move, to survive, and to challenge, ensuring that only those capable of following the design could access the next clue. Morvant's gaze was intense, studying the passage ahead. "Notice the use of water, light, and reflection," he said. "It's a multisensory code. The Templars designed it to test perception, attention, and patience. Any misalignment could mislead, hide the path, or trigger mechanisms to delay discovery. This is not just architecture. It's a living system." The historian nodded, understanding that each alignment was more than a solution. It was a dialogue with centuries of intelligence and foresight. Every movement, every observation, and every interpretation mattered. They advanced into the passage, water rising slightly to cover their boots. The fragments guided them, revealing subtle etchings on the walls that indicated angles, timing, and placement. The sequence was complex, requiring careful attention to detail and trust in the system. Shadows moved across the walls, distorted by water and lantern light, creating fleeting illusions of movement. The historian's heart pounded. The labyrinth was alive, responding to their interpretation, guiding them forward while testing their perception at every turn. The vanished pages were not static. They were in motion, encoded in a system that demanded skill and precision to follow. As they progressed, the passage opened into a small vaulted chamber, the final test of this segment of the labyrinth. A shallow pool reflected a symbol on the ceiling, perfectly aligned with the fragments. Placing the pieces carefully on a central pedestal revealed the hidden coordinates for the next chamber. The historian felt a thrill mingled with fear. The Templars had orchestrated a path through stone, water, light, and shadow that had endured centuries, and now they were walking it. The vanished pages were not lost. They were alive in their design, waiting for those capable of reading their complex, centuries-old language. The chamber they entered was cloaked in near-complete darkness, the faint glow of the lanterns casting long, trembling shadows across the damp stone walls. The air was thick, almost tangible, carrying the scent of centuries-old water and a faint metallic tang that seemed to cling to their skin. Every step echoed unnaturally, amplified by the vaulted ceiling and narrow angles, creating the sensation that the labyrinth itself was aware of their presence. The historian's heart raced as he held the fragments close, feeling their weight not just in his hands, but in the gravity of the task they represented. These were more than pages. They were the living pulse of the Templar legacy, encoded to endure through time, waiting for a worthy seeker to interpret them. Morvant moved cautiously ahead, his lantern highlighting faint carvings along the walls that had previously gone unnoticed. "Every mark, every groove has meaning," he whispered. The Templars didn't just hide knowledge. They orchestrated movement through space and perception. The labyrinth is as much a test of intellect as it is of patience. A misread symbol, a wrong step, and the path could vanish entirely. The historian studied the carvings, noting subtle variations in depth, angle, and orientation, realizing that these differences were not accidental. They were deliberate cues designed to guide interpretation. Each fragment he held was a key, a pointer toward understanding the system that had protected the vanished pages for centuries. The floor was slick, uneven in ways that challenged every careful step. Shallow pools reflected fractured light, revealing details in the carvings above and around them. The historian knelt, placing fragments against the stone, and noticed that when correctly aligned, faint lines of light traced patterns across the walls, pointing toward a partially concealed doorway at the far end of the chamber. The Templars had engineered not only concealment but revelation. The environment itself participated in the puzzle, using light, reflection, and perspective to communicate with those who knew how to see. It was a system that rewarded observation, patience, and understanding, ensuring that only the worthy could advance. Morvant's eyes scanned the chamber with a sharp intensity, noting marks that suggested previous seekers had come close to success but faltered. "The labyrinth is adaptive," he said quietly. "It teaches, tests, and corrects. Many have tried to follow these paths and failed. The Templars embedded layers of challenge within the walls themselves, guiding those with insight and diverting those without. The pages are alive in the system, moving, responding to interpretation, and only revealing themselves when the seeker is ready." The historian nodded, understanding that this journey was not merely a physical pursuit, but an intellectual and almost spiritual trial. Every alignment, every step, carried the weight of centuries of foresight. He approached the hidden doorway, its edges faintly etched with symbols that corresponded to the fragments he carried. Aligning the pieces precisely, he observed subtle shifts. A hidden panel moved slightly, revealing a sliver of light from the next passage. The water in the chamber seemed to respond, shimmering as though acknowledging the correctness of the sequence. The Templars had designed an architecture that was dynamic, almost alive, where the environment itself communicated success or misstep. It was a system built to endure time, misdirection, and human error, and yet it rewarded precision, insight, and careful observation with forward motion. The tunnel beyond was narrower, forcing the historian and Morvant into single file. Water rose gradually along the edges, reflecting symbols etched along the walls in fractured patterns. He noticed faint scratches, evidence that someone else had navigated this path recently, leaving subtle traces for others to interpret, or perhaps to mislead. The realization hit him. They were not the only seekers. The labyrinth was now a stage for pursuit, not merely discovery. Every movement, every interpretation, could have consequences, and failure could mean losing the trail forever or encountering dangers they had yet to anticipate. The historian traced the carvings along the tunnel, aligning fragments meticulously. Each symbol revealed angles, timing, and placement instructions, directing them toward a partially submerged chamber ahead. The water's reflection illuminated the carvings in a pattern that only became clear when the fragments were positioned correctly. It was a moment of clarity and exhilaration. The labyrinth was alive, a system of intelligence encoded into stone, water, and light, and the historian could feel himself in tune with it, moving in harmony with centuries of planning. The Templars had created a path that required patience, intellect, and courage, and now he understood why so many had failed before him. Morvant's voice broke the silence, low and tense. "This is the convergence point," he said. "The Templars designed it as a culmination of trials. Here, intellect, perception, and patience are tested together. Align incorrectly, and the sequence collapses. Align correctly, and the path forward reveals itself. The vanished pages are here. They have always moved through this space, guided by design and intent." The historian's pulse quickened. They were close to the culmination of this segment of the labyrinth, a step away from understanding not just the location of the vanished pages, but the intelligence and foresight that had preserved them through centuries. The chamber opened into a wider space, its walls adorned with complex geometric carvings and symbolic notations. A shallow pool in the center reflected faint images on the vaulted ceiling above. The historian placed the fragments on a stone pedestal at the center, aligning each symbol carefully with the carvings. As the last fragment clicked into place, the carvings seemed to shimmer subtly, revealing a hidden mechanism that opened a narrow passage at the far end. The system was precise, elegant, and merciless in its demands for accuracy. Every detail mattered, and each correct alignment brought them closer to the next stage of the labyrinth and to the vanished pages. The historian stepped into the newly revealed passage, feeling the centuries of history pressing around him. The air grew colder, the water deeper, and the shadows longer. Symbols continued along the walls, guiding their way, interacting with the fragments to illuminate hidden details. The labyrinth was a living archive, a dynamic guardian, and the historian understood that each step forward was a dialogue with centuries of intelligence, foresight, and secrecy. The vanished pages were not lost. They were alive in design, waiting for those capable of following the trail with precision, insight, and courage. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber that seemed impossibly ancient, its high vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that flickered with the light of their lanterns. The water around their boots rose slightly as they entered, shallow pools reflecting intricate carvings etched into the stone floor and walls. Each symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as if aware of the fragments in the historian's hands, resonating with centuries of carefully orchestrated intelligence. The labyrinth beneath Venice was no longer just a physical structure. It was a living, breathing archive, a system designed to test the intellect, patience, and courage of anyone daring enough to follow its concealed path. Morvant moved cautiously ahead, studying the carvings on the walls with intensity. "This is where the Templars' foresight is most evident," he whispered. "They did not merely hide the pages, they created an evolving network, one that interacts with the environment, challenges perception, and tests understanding. Every mark, every groove, every subtle angle carries significance. Only those who can read the system in its entirety may proceed." The historian nodded, realizing that the complexity of the labyrinth was beyond anything he had imagined. It was a system that filtered seekers not just through intellect, but through intuition and perception, rewarding insight and punishing oversight. He traced the carvings along the walls, noting faint notches and scratches that hinted at previous seekers, perhaps scholars, perhaps opportunists, who had attempted this path and failed. The fragments in his hands began to align perfectly with the carvings, revealing a sequence of placements that activated a hidden mechanism within the chamber. Light reflected off the water in precise angles, illuminating a hidden alcove at the far end. The Templars had designed not merely physical concealment, but layered revelation, requiring observation, patience, and precision to uncover each secret. The historian approached the alcove and placed the fragments carefully against the carvings. A subtle vibration ran through the stone, and a section of the wall shifted silently, revealing a narrow tunnel descending even deeper into the labyrinth. His pulse quickened. The vanishing pages were not merely hidden, they were guided, moving through centuries of planning, safeguarded by architecture, reflection, and human ingenuity. The labyrinth was alive, a system that demanded respect, caution, and relentless focus. Morvant's voice broke the silence. "Notice the interplay between water, shadow, and symbol," he said quietly. "The Templars engineered this chamber to challenge not just intellect, but perception and composure. One hesitation, one misalignment, and the sequence collapses. They understood that knowledge is only as valuable as the seeker's ability to protect, interpret, and apply it." The historian felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him, aware that every step carried not only historical significance but immediate consequences. He continued into the tunnel, which narrowed sharply and forced them to proceed in single file. Water rose higher, brushing their knees, reflecting distorted images of the carvings above. The walls were slick, but etched with symbols that became clear only when the fragments were held at the correct angles. The system was not static. It responded to interpretation, movement, and alignment, guiding the worthy forward while obscuring the path to those who failed. The labyrinth was a living test, a dynamic archive, and the historian understood that the vanished pages were encoded within this system, alive in motion and waiting for those capable of reading it correctly. A sudden draft brushed against his neck, making him shiver. He stopped, listening intently, but heard only the faint echo of water dripping from the vaulted ceiling. Yet the sense of being watched lingered. Someone else could be following them, tracing the same path through the labyrinth. The historian's pulse quickened. The pursuit was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, and dangerous. The Templars had built safeguards to protect knowledge, but human ambition, patience, and cunning introduced unpredictable variables. Every movement now carried consequences far beyond simple discovery. He traced the carvings along the tunnel walls, aligning the fragments meticulously. Each symbol revealed further instructions, subtle cues for timing, placement, and orientation. The pool at the tunnel's end reflected faint images on the ceiling, only visible when the fragments were positioned correctly. The historian marveled at the genius of the Templars, a multi-sensory system that integrated architecture, light, water, and symbol into a living guide. It was a masterpiece of foresight and precision, ensuring that only those capable of fully understanding the design could continue. Morvant gestured toward a small alcove at the far end. "This is a checkpoint," he explained. "Here, the labyrinth tests synthesis. You must combine perception, intellect, and intuition to progress. Misinterpretation will halt your advance, but correct alignment reveals the next stage of the journey." The vanished pages are not lost. They move through this space, alive in design, waiting for those who understand. The historian approached, kneeling carefully to position the fragments against the carved symbols. Light danced across the water, highlighting subtle details that had previously gone unnoticed. Each fragment clicked into place, triggering a mechanism that caused a section of the wall to shift, revealing a staircase descending further into darkness. The descent was narrow and treacherous, the water rising higher with each step. Symbols etched along the walls guided their path, interacting with the fragments to reveal the correct sequence of movements. The historian felt a thrill mingled with tension. The labyrinth was alive, responsive to interpretation, and demanding constant vigilance. The vanished pages were not stationary. They were guided through this centuries-old network, safeguarded by intelligence, foresight, and human ingenuity. Every step was a dialogue with history itself, a conversation with minds long dead yet infinitely present in the architecture and symbols around him. As they reached the bottom of the staircase, the passage opened into a broader chamber, partially submerged, the walls carved with geometric patterns and cryptic inscriptions. The fragments aligned with the carvings, revealing a hidden pedestal in the center. Placing the pieces carefully, the historian watched as shadows shifted and reflected across the chamber, revealing a concealed doorway leading further into the labyrinth. The Templars' design was flawless, a system that endured centuries, testing seekers at every level and guiding only those capable of understanding. The vanished pages were no longer a distant legend. They were within reach, alive in their movement through time and space, waiting for the worthy to claim them. The chamber that awaited them was vast, the vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the faint lantern light. Water ran through shallow channels along the floor, reflecting the flickering glow and casting fractured images of the carvings etched into the walls. The symbols were intricate, almost hypnotic, layered with meaning that could only be discerned through careful observation and alignment with the fragments. Every footstep echoed in the vast space, reverberating like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The historian moved slowly, acutely aware of the weight he carried, not just in the fragments, but in the centuries of history encoded into every stone and shadow. Morvant led the way, his eyes scanning the walls with intensity. "This is the Chamber of Convergence," he whispered. "Here, the Templars combined intellect, perception, and geometry into a system that tests not just the mind, but patience and courage. Every line, every groove, every reflection has meaning. The labyrinth is alive, responding to correct interpretation and guiding those worthy of progress." The historian nodded, feeling the truth of the words as he observed the interplay of light, water, and symbol. The labyrinth was more than architecture. It was a living archive, a mechanism designed to endure centuries and filter seekers according to their understanding and skill. He approached the central pool, shallow but precise, reflecting faint symbols on the ceiling above. Kneeling, he placed the fragments on the stone edge, aligning each piece with the carvings around the pool. The water shimmered subtly, highlighting details that had previously gone unnoticed. The Templars had encoded movement, timing, and placement into a single sequence, ensuring that only those who observed closely could reveal the next stage of the journey. The historian felt a thrill mixed with tension. The vanished pages were not lost. They were alive in the system, moving, waiting for those capable of following the intricate path. Morvant's voice broke the silence, low and intense. "Notice the patterns," he said. "They are multidimensional. Light, reflection, water, and symbol are all part of the code. A misstep here, even a small hesitation, could misalign the sequence. The Templars designed this chamber to test every aspect of perception and intellect. The pages are guided through this labyrinth, alive in their design, and only those who understand the full system may continue." The historian traced the carvings carefully, adjusting the fragments, feeling the pulse of centuries of intelligence encoded into stone. The chamber was filled with subtle movement, shadows that seemed to shift independently of the lantern's light, reflections in the water that suggested angles and symbols previously hidden. The historian realized the brilliance of the Templars' design. The labyrinth was not static, it was interactive. It demanded patience, intellect, and precise observation. Each correct alignment revealed the next hidden path, while errors concealed the way forward or redirected the seeker into dead ends. The system was alive, responding to understanding and testing every capability the seeker possessed. He moved toward a partially submerged alcove, noticing faint carvings along the water's edge. Aligning the fragments with the symbols revealed a subtle pattern in the reflections, pointing to a hidden seam in the wall. Applying careful pressure, a section shifted, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. The historian's pulse quickened. This was the culmination of the sequence in this chamber, the doorway to the next stage of the labyrinth and closer to the vanished pages. The Templars had orchestrated centuries of movement and concealment, guiding knowledge through a living system of stone, water, and shadow. Morvant paused, studying the symbols etched into the walls surrounding the new passage. "This chamber," he whispered, "is a culmination point. The Templars designed it to integrate all prior lessons: alignment, timing, perception, and patience. Only those capable of reading the entire system accurately may proceed. The vanished pages have moved through this chamber for centuries, guided by foresight, intellect, and deliberate design." The historian felt the enormity of the moment. They were not merely discovering a hidden archive. They were tracing a living, intelligent path orchestrated by minds centuries ahead of their own. The passage narrowed, forcing them to proceed in single file. Water rose slightly along the edges, reflecting symbols etched along the walls in distorted, fragmented images. He traced each carving carefully, adjusting the fragments as needed. The system demanded both precision and intuition. The Templars had designed a labyrinth that filtered seekers through intellect, courage, and perception. Any deviation could result in failure, obscuring the path or diverting the seeker entirely. The vanished pages were protected not only by stone and water, but by intellect itself. A faint draft stirred the surface of the water, drawing his attention to the shadows along the far wall. He froze, listening intently, aware that the labyrinth was not merely a physical test. It was also a psychological one. The sense of being observed, followed, or challenged by unseen forces was part of the design, a layer of protection built to ensure only the worthy could progress. Whoever else might be pursuing the path was constrained by the same system, forced to interpret, anticipate, and act with the same precision. The labyrinth was alive, and they were participants in its centuries-old game. The historian traced the carvings along the tunnel walls, aligning fragments meticulously. The reflections in the water illuminated a previously hidden alcove, containing additional fragments and subtle symbols indicating the next sequence of movements. Each step forward was confirmation that they were reading the labyrinth correctly, following the intended path of the vanished pages. The Templars had not merely hidden knowledge, they had orchestrated it, ensuring that only those capable of interpreting the system could reveal its secrets. As they advanced into the newly revealed passage, the chamber behind them seemed to settle, shadows shifting subtly as if acknowledging their progress. The historian felt the pulse of centuries in the stone around him, the ingenuity of the Templars tangible in every groove, reflection, and symbol. They were close, the next stage of the labyrinth, and the next stage in the centuries-long journey of the vanished pages, was just ahead. The system was precise, demanding, and alive, and every step required unwavering focus, patience, and courage. The passage beyond the chamber was narrower, darker, and colder, forcing them to proceed in single file, the water around their ankles rising slightly with each cautious step. The faint flicker of lantern light reflected off the shallow pools, illuminating the faintest traces of carvings etched along the walls. Each symbol seemed almost alive, resonating with the fragments in the historian's hands, pulsing faintly as though acknowledging their presence. The labyrinth beneath Venice was no longer simply a structure. It was a living entity, a calculated system of intelligence, designed to test intellect, observation, and courage across centuries. The historian's pulse quickened as he realized that they were now deep within the Templars' most sophisticated network, a sequence designed to protect the vanished pages with precision that bordered on obsession. Morvant moved cautiously ahead, his eyes scanning the walls for the subtle anomalies that indicated the next step. Here, the Templars' ingenuity reaches its zenith, he whispered. Every mark, every line, every shallow groove has significance. They did not merely hide knowledge, they orchestrated it. The labyrinth itself communicates, guiding those who can read it and obscuring the way for those who cannot. The pages move through this system, alive in their design, waiting for the worthy. The historian nodded, acutely aware that each step was now a conversation with centuries of foresight, a test of intellect and perception where any mistake could erase the path entirely. The water deepened slightly, brushing the historian's knees, and he paused to examine a set of carvings that reflected in a distorted angle on the water's surface. Aligning the fragments against the wall, he noticed that subtle changes in positioning altered the reflection, revealing hidden symbols previously invisible. The Templars had created a multi-sensory code, integrating perception, light, and water into a system designed to guide the worthy forward. Every step, every alignment demanded precision. One misinterpretation could send a seeker into a blind corridor, or worse, trigger mechanisms meant to mislead and protect the legacy of the vanished pages. Morvant's voice broke the silence. The labyrinth is adaptive, he said. It teaches and tests simultaneously. The Templars understood that knowledge must be earned, that only those who perceive, interpret, and act deliberately should proceed. The vanished pages are not merely hidden. They move through a controlled system, alive in design, guided through centuries of intelligence. The historian's eyes scanned the chamber, noting faint scratches and signs of previous seekers. Some had attempted to navigate this path, only to fail and leave their traces behind, a warning and a guide for those who followed. He moved deeper into the tunnel, water rising to mid-calf, the reflections of symbols on the walls fractured by ripples in the pool. Kneeling, he placed fragments against the carvings, observing the subtle interaction between light, shadow, and symbol. Each correct alignment caused a faint vibration through the stone, as though the labyrinth itself recognized the accuracy of the placement. A hidden panel shifted slightly in the far wall, revealing a sliver of light from the next passage. The Templars had designed not only a path but a dynamic system that responded to correct understanding, rewarding the attentive and punishing those who faltered. The historian paused to study the carvings in the new passage. They were more complex than anything he had encountered before, a series of interconnected symbols that required simultaneous observation, alignment, and interpretation. The fragments were the key, but they alone were insufficient without careful study of the walls, the reflections in the water, and the angle of lantern light. The Templars had built this system to protect not only knowledge but the integrity of the seeker's understanding, ensuring that only those capable of grasping the full complexity could advance. Morvant pointed to faint geometric shapes etched along the wall. "These shapes indicate movement," he whispered. "Observe the sequence, align the fragments, and notice the reflections." The Templars used geometry as a guide, a secondary language that interacts with light and shadow. One misstep and the path forward disappears. The labyrinth is alive, adaptive, and relentless. The vanished pages are here. They have always been guided by this system, waiting for those capable of decoding it. The historian's heart raced. The labyrinth was more than a maze. It was a living puzzle, designed with intelligence that had survived centuries untouched. He carefully positioned the fragments on a small pedestal along the side of the passage, aligning symbols with carvings etched into the stone. As the last fragment clicked into place, faint vibrations ran through the walls, and a section of the ceiling reflected a hidden set of symbols onto the water below. The passage beyond shifted subtly, revealing a narrow corridor descending further into darkness. Each step now carried the weight of centuries, every alignment a confirmation that they were reading the labyrinth correctly and following the intended path of the vanished pages. The historian advanced into the corridor, the water now lapping at his knees. Symbols etched into the walls guided their path, interacting with the fragments to reveal angles, timing, and orientation. The labyrinth demanded constant focus, The slightest hesitation could misalign the sequence and obscure the next stage. He realized that the Templars had constructed a system that tested intellect, perception, and composure simultaneously. The vanished pages were not merely hidden, they were alive in design, moving through centuries of foresight and intelligence. A faint noise echoed through the corridor. A soft splash of water or perhaps the shifting of stone. The historian froze, listening intently. Whoever else was following the path could be close, tracing the same intricate sequence of symbols and reflections. The labyrinth was no longer just a historical puzzle. It had become a living, urgent race. Each step forward demanded precision, courage, and awareness. The Templars had built a system resilient to human error, yet vulnerable to pursuit, ensuring that only the most capable seekers could survive the journey. The corridor opened into a wider chamber, partially submerged in water, its walls adorned with complex geometric carvings and cryptic symbols. The fragments aligned perfectly with the carvings, revealing a hidden pedestal in the center. Placing the pieces carefully, the historian watched as shadows shifted subtly, revealing a concealed doorway leading further into the labyrinth. The Templars' design was flawless, a living archive of intelligence, safeguarding the vanished pages and testing every aspect of the seeker's mind and perception. The next stage of the labyrinth awaited, and the historian felt the centuries of foresight surrounding him, guiding each careful step toward revelation. The chamber that awaited them was unlike any they had previously encountered. Its vaulted ceiling seemed to stretch endlessly, disappearing into darkness that swallowed the lantern light. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of damp stone and stagnant water, and a subtle metallic tang that seemed almost alive, lingering on the edges of perception. Water filled shallow channels along the uneven floor, reflecting flickering lantern light onto the intricate carvings etched into the walls. Each symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as though acknowledging the fragments the historian held, resonating with centuries of intelligence embedded into the stone by the Templars. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, creating an almost oppressive sense of presence, as if the chamber itself were alive, aware of their intrusion. Morvant moved cautiously ahead, eyes scanning the walls for the subtle anomalies that indicated the next step in the labyrinth. "This is the Chamber of Culmination," he whispered. Here, the Templars combined architecture, geometry, perception, and intellect into a system designed to test the seeker completely. Each line, each groove, each reflection is deliberate. The vanished pages are not merely hidden. They move through this system, alive in their design, guiding only the worthy forward. The historian nodded, feeling the immense weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every movement, every interpretation, carried consequences not only for discovery but for the preservation of centuries-old knowledge. The shallow pools covering parts of the floor reflected symbols on the vaulted ceiling, fragmented and distorted by ripples. The historian knelt, positioning the fragments carefully along a central pedestal. Aligning each piece precisely revealed subtle shifts in the reflections on the water's surface. The Templars had engineered the labyrinth as an interactive system, a living archive that responded to correct interpretation. Shadows moved almost imperceptibly as light interacted with water, revealing patterns invisible to the inattentive. The system was precise, demanding observation, intellect, and patience in equal measure. Morvant's voice broke the silence, low and intense. Here, the labyrinth tests synthesis. It is no longer sufficient to follow individual symbols or sequences. You must combine observation, alignment, intuition, and timing. Misinterpretation here will halt progress entirely, while correct understanding opens the next path. The vanished pages have traveled this path for centuries, guided through precise mechanisms that reward the worthy and obscure the unprepared. The historian felt the weight of those words. They were not simply uncovering history, they were participating in it, stepping into a living system designed to endure through centuries of secrecy and foresight. He traced the carvings along the walls, noting subtle differences in depth, angle, and orientation that had previously gone unnoticed. Each fragment acted as a key, activating portions of the system when positioned correctly. The reflections in the water illuminated hidden lines, revealing sequences that guided them toward a partially submerged alcove at the far end of the chamber. The labyrinth was dynamic, interacting with the seeker, responding to interpretation, and only revealing its secrets to those capable of understanding the full system. The vanished pages were not inert, they were alive in motion, encoded in a centuries-old system of intelligence and design. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, a drip of water, the subtle shift of stone, and the historian froze. He realized they were not alone. Whoever else might be following this path was close, tracing the same intricate sequence of symbols and reflections. The labyrinth had become a stage for pursuit, not merely discovery. Every step carried heightened stakes. The Templars had built protections into the system, but human curiosity, intelligence, and cunning introduced unpredictable variables. Every action now had consequences beyond simple interpretation or alignment. He moved carefully toward the alcove, water rising to his knees. The reflections revealed hidden symbols along the walls, guiding him in a precise sequence of alignment. Kneeling, he placed the fragments along the pedestal, observing the interactions of shadow, light, and water. The system responded immediately. Faint vibrations ran through the stone, and a section of the far wall shifted, revealing a narrow corridor descending further into darkness. The Templars had created an architecture that was not static but responsive, almost alive. It tested intellect, patience, and perception, ensuring that only those capable of reading the system in its entirety could advance. Morvant pointed to geometric carvings along the walls, barely visible in the dim light. "These indicate timing and movement," he whispered. "The labyrinth is a multi-layered system, combining geometry, reflection, and symbol to convey information. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the path forward disappears. The vanished pages are alive in this design. They have moved through this chamber for centuries, guided by intelligence, foresight, and human ingenuity. Only those capable of understanding the full system may proceed." The historian's pulse quickened, and a thrill of awe mingled with tension as he realized the precision and brilliance of the Templars' plan. The passage narrowed as they advanced, forcing them to proceed in single file. Water reflected the symbols on the walls in distorted, fractured patterns. Every fragment placement, every movement, every observation interacted with the chamber's design, guiding or obscuring the path forward. The system was relentless, demanding constant vigilance. The vanished pages were not simply hidden, they were choreographed through space and perception, protected by centuries of foresight and intelligence. The historian felt the centuries of Templar ingenuity pressing around him, guiding each careful step with invisible hands. Finally, the corridor opened into a broader space. The floor was shallowly submerged, the walls adorned with complex symbols and geometric patterns that reflected onto the water's surface. The fragments aligned with carvings on a central pedestal, revealing subtle mechanisms that shifted shadows and light across the chamber. A hidden doorway at the far end became visible, signaling the path forward. The Templars' design was flawless, a living system that endured centuries, testing intellect, perception, and courage at every turn. The vanished pages were not myths. They were alive in movement, waiting for those capable of reading the labyrinth's intricate, centuries-old language. The historian stepped toward the doorway, heart pounding, fully aware that the next stage would demand even greater focus and precision. The labyrinth beneath Venice had revealed its purpose, a system of living intelligence, guiding and testing those who sought the Templar legacy. Every reflection, symbol, and fragment interacted to form a complete sequence of discovery. They were close to uncovering the vanished pages, and the culmination of centuries of planning and secrecy was just ahead, waiting to be claimed by the worthy. The narrow corridor beyond the last chamber was almost suffocating, the walls pressing in on all sides as the water rose just above their knees. Lantern light trembled across the surface of shallow pools, creating fragmented reflections that danced along the walls, multiplying the carvings etched centuries before. Each symbol seemed to pulse faintly, resonating with the fragments the historian carried in his hands. The labyrinth beneath Venice was no longer merely a structure. It was alive, a living archive designed to test intellect, perception, and resolve. The historian could feel the weight of centuries pressing against him, the ingenuity of the Templars both intimidating and exhilarating, a silent reminder that the vanished pages were never meant to be easily claimed. Morvant moved cautiously ahead, scanning the walls for subtle variations in the carvings. "This is the final sequence before the ultimate convergence," he whispered. "The Templars have designed this stage to test synthesis, the combination of intellect, patience, and perception. Every line, every angle, every reflection matters. Misalignment here will halt progress completely, while correct alignment will reveal the final pathway to the vanished pages. We are close, but the labyrinth is not done testing us." The historian nodded, feeling his heart rate accelerate. Every movement, every choice, now carried the weight of both centuries of history and immediate survival. Shallow pools reflected fragmented images of symbols on the vaulted ceiling above. The historian knelt carefully, placing the fragments against a central pedestal. The reflections shifted subtly, illuminating hidden carvings on the far wall that had previously gone unnoticed. The labyrinth was dynamic, responding to observation and interpretation, rewarding precision and punishing hesitation. The Templars had built a system that was interactive, intelligent, and almost alive, a living archive that demanded total engagement from anyone attempting to follow the path of the vanished pages. Morvant's voice broke the tense silence. "Notice the interplay between water, shadow, and symbol," he said softly. "The Templars designed this stage to test timing, perception, and composure simultaneously. One misstep, one moment of doubt, and the path forward disappears. The vanished pages move through this system, alive in their design, and only those who fully comprehend it may proceed. Every element interacts with the others, nothing here is random." The historian's eyes scanned the walls, noting subtle scratches left by previous seekers who had attempted to follow the path, only to fail. These remnants were both a warning and a guide, confirming the brilliance of the Templars' design. The corridor narrowed even further, forcing them to move single file through water that rose to mid-thigh. Each step required careful observation, every alignment of fragments and reflections demanding precision. Shadows moved and flickered across the walls, seemingly independent of the lantern light. The labyrinth tested not only intellect but composure, ensuring that only those with patience, courage, and skill could survive the journey. The vanished pages were not merely hidden. They were guided through centuries of meticulous planning, protected by a system that was as much psychological as it was architectural. The historian traced the carvings along the walls, aligning the fragments with incredible care. Each successful alignment caused faint vibrations through the stone, subtle acknowledgments of accuracy from the living archive. Light reflected off the water at precise angles, revealing hidden symbols that indicated the next step in the sequence. The Templars had engineered not merely concealment but guided revelation, ensuring that each discovery was earned and understood, not stumbled upon by chance. The labyrinth was alive, responsive to interpretation, and merciless to mistakes. Morvant paused to study a series of geometric patterns carved along the far wall. "These are instructions," he whispered. "They are multi-layered. Symbol, reflection, water, and geometry combine to guide the seeker. Timing, alignment, and observation must all synchronize perfectly. Any error and the path vanishes. The labyrinth tests synthesis here, demanding total engagement. The vanished pages have moved through this stage for centuries, alive in their orchestration, awaiting the worthy." The historian's pulse quickened. The ingenuity and precision of the Templars was almost overwhelming, yet it was also exhilarating. Every correct alignment brought them closer to the ultimate revelation. He approached a partially submerged pedestal at the corridor center. The fragments aligned perfectly with the carvings, revealing a hidden mechanism beneath the water. As the last piece clicked into place, subtle vibrations ran through the stone, and the water's reflections illuminated a previously concealed doorway at the far end of the corridor. The Templars had engineered a system that was responsive, intelligent, and almost sentient. Each successful step confirmed the seeker's understanding and guided them toward the final stage of the labyrinth. The vanished pages were near, their centuries-old journey almost complete. The historian advanced into the newly revealed corridor, water rising slightly with every step. Symbols etched into the walls interacted with the fragments, guiding precise movement and alignment. The labyrinth demanded absolute focus. The slightest hesitation could obscure the next stage entirely. He realized the Templars had created more than a maze. They had engineered a living system, a dynamic archive that tested intellect, perception, courage, and composure simultaneously. The vanished pages were not static. They were alive in their orchestration, waiting for those capable of interpreting and navigating the full sequence. A faint sound echoed, water dripping from the vaulted ceiling, a soft shift of stone, or perhaps another seeker following the same path. The historian froze, listening intently. The labyrinth was not merely a historical puzzle. It was now a living, urgent race. Each step forward carried immediate stakes. The Templars had built protections into the system, but human curiosity, intelligence, and ambition introduced unpredictable variables. Every move now mattered, and the margin for error had narrowed to almost nothing. Finally, the corridor opened into a wider chamber. Shallow water covered the floor, reflecting complex symbols and geometric patterns on the walls. Aligning the fragments with the central pedestal revealed subtle mechanisms that shifted shadows and light, illuminating a concealed doorway leading to the final chamber. The Templars' design was flawless, a living, breathing system that endured centuries, testing intellect, perception, and courage. The vanished pages were no longer a distant myth. They were alive in motion, waiting for the worthy to reach them. The historian took a deep breath, preparing to step into the ultimate culmination of the labyrinth and confront the legacy that had survived through centuries of secrecy and foresight. The final chamber opened before them like a revelation, vast and impossibly silent, the vaulted ceiling lost entirely in darkness. The water beneath their feet was calm, reflecting every flicker of their lanterns with crystal clarity, multiplying the intricate carvings etched into the walls into endless patterns. Each symbol seemed to resonate with the fragments in the historian's hands, vibrating faintly with centuries of carefully encoded intelligence. It was as if the chamber itself was aware of their presence, aware of their progress through the labyrinth, and aware that the culmination of its secrets was within reach. The historian felt the centuries pressing around him, the ingenuity of the Templars almost tangible in the very air. Morvant led the way cautiously, his eyes scanning every inch of the walls. "This is the Chamber of Revelation," he whispered. "The Templars built this stage to test synthesis at the highest level. Here, intellect, perception, intuition, and courage converge. Every line, every shadow, every reflection carries meaning. The vanished pages are not simply hidden. They are alive in this system, guided by the centuries of design. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the path forward disappears. Only those capable of total comprehension will succeed." The historian's heart raced. The labyrinth had been a test at every turn, but this final stage was something almost sacred in its gravity. The shallow pools across the chamber floor reflected fragmented images of the vaulted ceiling above, creating a kaleidoscope of symbols that seemed to shift and move. The historian knelt carefully, placing the fragments on a central pedestal, aligning them with precision. As the pieces clicked into place, subtle vibrations ran through the stone beneath their feet, and faint light shimmered along the walls. Reflections on the water's surface revealed carvings that had been invisible moments before, guiding their next steps. The labyrinth was a living archive, a dynamic system designed to interact with the seeker, rewarding precision and understanding while punishing hesitation or error. Morvant's voice cut through the silence, low and intense. "Observe the interplay of light, water, and symbol. This is the culmination of everything we have encountered. The Templars have integrated perception, timing, geometry, and intuition into a single system. The vanished pages are guided through this architecture, waiting for those who can read it in full. Every correct alignment brings you closer, Every misstep obscures the way. The system is alive and it responds to understanding. The historian felt both awe and tension. They were standing at the threshold of history, guided by the genius of minds long dead yet more present than ever in this intricate design. He traced the carvings along the walls, noting subtle variations in depth, angle, and spacing. Each fragment acted as a key, interacting with the chamber in precise ways. Light reflected off the water at exact angles, revealing hidden symbols and pathways. The labyrinth demanded constant focus, and even the slightest misinterpretation could obscure the next stage. The historian understood now that the Templars had engineered a system that was not static but responsive, a living intelligence that ensured the worthy could proceed while protecting the knowledge from the unprepared. The narrow alcove at the far end of the chamber contained additional fragments and carvings, indicating the next sequence of actions. As the historian placed each piece in the correct alignment, faint shifts in shadows and reflections illuminated a hidden doorway leading deeper into the chamber. It was as if the labyrinth itself was guiding them, responding to understanding and rewarding those who had the patience, intellect, and courage to follow its rules precisely. The vanished pages were not lost. They were alive in the system, encoded in centuries of foresight and human ingenuity. Morvant pointed to the geometric patterns etched into the walls, barely visible in the dim light. Timing, alignment, observation, they all converge here. The Templars built this to ensure that only those capable of full comprehension could reach the final stage. The vanished pages have moved through this chamber for centuries, alive in design, awaiting discovery. The system is a culmination of their foresight, a mechanism that has preserved knowledge through time. We are about to see the final sequence. The historian felt a thrill mixed with tension, aware that the culmination of centuries of planning was now before him, waiting for the correct interpretation and action. The water rose slightly as they approached the central pedestal. The historian aligned the fragments carefully with the carvings, observing the interactions of light and reflection. As the final piece clicked into place, the chamber responded. Shadows shifted, the water shimmered, and a hidden section of the far wall began to move, revealing a doorway leading to a small, elevated alcove. In that alcove lay a collection of ancient parchment, neatly stacked and protected by centuries of precise engineering. The vanished pages were real, and they were finally within reach. The historian stepped forward cautiously, heart pounding, aware that the Templars had built this system not just to protect knowledge, but to demand understanding, composure, and insight from anyone who sought it. The labyrinth had tested intellect, patience, perception, and courage, and now it demanded one final act of comprehension. As he lifted the first page, he felt the weight of centuries in his hands, the genius of the Templars almost palpable. These pages were not simply historical records. They were a living testament, encoded with secrets, foresight, and a system that had endured the ravages of time. Morvant watched silently, a mixture of awe and reverence in his eyes. "The Templars' design is complete," he whispered. "Every chamber, every symbol, every reflection was part of this final test. The pages are preserved, alive in the labyrinth, and we are the first in centuries to witness their journey fully. We must treat them with care, for they carry the legacy of intellect, foresight, and secrecy that few in history have ever understood." The historian nodded, fully aware that this moment was not just discovery. It was communion with centuries of intelligence, patience, and human ingenuity. The historian held the pages carefully, the final revelation settling around him like a shroud of quiet triumph. The labyrinth had tested everything, and they had emerged not just as discoverers, but as participants in a centuries-long design. The vanished pages were real, preserved, and alive, their secrets intact and their legacy unbroken. The chamber around them seemed to exhale, the centuries of tension giving way to stillness, a moment of profound recognition and awe. The final chamber had revealed its secrets, yet silence held a weight heavier than any stone. The historian traced the vanished pages, feeling the centuries of knowledge and foresight pressed into each delicate parchment. Every symbol, every diagram, spoke not merely of the Templars' strategies, but of their vision, a design that demanded intellect, courage, and patience. The labyrinth had tested them in every sense, ensuring only those worthy could reach this point. Holding the pages, he realized they were alive, a bridge between past and present, a living dialogue of foresight and discipline. Morvant whispered, "This is not mere discovery. These pages are a testament to foresight and responsibility. The labyrinth preserved them for comprehension, for reflection, for those capable of understanding their depth." The historian nodded, recognizing the gravity. The Templars' genius lay not in secrecy alone, but in creating a system that demanded engagement, tested judgment, and preserved knowledge across centuries. Every ripple in the water reflected not just light, but a reminder. The pages carried the legacy of minds long gone. They were a blueprint for understanding human endeavor, the intersection of intellect and faith. In their hands, history felt alive. The true revelation was the journey itself, the trials, the alignments, the reflections, all guiding them to wisdom. The vanished pages had endured not as relics, but as living knowledge, awaiting comprehension, respect, and reflection. The labyrinth had surrendered its secrets, but a deeper truth lingered in the shadows. Lantern light danced across the water, mirroring the carvings that had guided them through centuries. The vanished pages were not mere objects. They were conduits of foresight, alive with the intentions of the Templars who had crafted the labyrinth. Each reflection, each alignment, demanded understanding, patience, and ethical engagement. Morvant spoke softly. Every chamber, every fragment, every reflection was designed to ensure comprehension, not mere possession. The Templars understood the fragility of knowledge, the responsibility that comes with foresight. The historian nodded, aware that the journey had been as much about shaping the mind and character as it had been about discovery. The pages revealed strategies, philosophy, and encoded wisdom. They were a dialogue across time, meant to be interpreted carefully, responsibly, and reflectively. The labyrinth had not merely hidden knowledge. It had preserved a system for comprehension, teaching lessons in patience, courage, and intellect. Standing by the reflective pools, the historian felt the weight of centuries, the brilliance of the Templars, and the responsibility now entrusted to them. The journey was complete, yet the dialogue continued. The pages, alive in purpose, called for reflection, stewardship, and reverence. The discovery was not an endpoint. It was a beginning, a challenge to honor history, understand foresight, and continue the conversation across generations. Emerging from the labyrinth into Venice's quiet streets, the historian felt the full weight of what had been revealed. The vanished pages were more than discovery. They were a living legacy, preserved through ingenuity, patience, and courage. Every step of the labyrinth had tested intellect, perception, and character, and now the culmination was theirs to bear responsibly. Morvant said softly, "History is not static. The Templars entrusted us with more than pages. They entrusted us with understanding, reflection, and the continuation of their foresight. How we engage with this knowledge will shape its legacy." The historian felt awe and humility, aware that this was a dialogue spanning centuries. The pages carried lessons in strategy, faith, and the discipline of thought, demanding care and reflection. The city above seemed oblivious to the hidden genius below, yet the labyrinth's purpose echoed in the historian's mind. The vanished pages were alive in their design, their survival ensured by a centuries-old system that challenged, tested, and guided. This knowledge was not for idle curiosity. It was a call to comprehension, stewardship, and the ethical continuation of the Templars' vision. As dawn broke over Venice, the historian understood that the journey was ongoing. The labyrinth had ended, but the dialogue continued. The vanished pages were no longer myth. They were living testimony, a bridge between past and present, and a call to reflect, honor, and preserve human ingenuity for generations yet to come.